On my 68th birthday, my daughter leaned across our private table at an upscale Atlanta steakhouse and whispered to her husband, "While I keep her busy, you go change the locks at her estate." He nodded, kissed my cheek, and slipped out the back door. I just sipped my sweet tea and smiled. 50 minutes later, he rushed back into the restaurant. He was sweating right through his custom Italian suit. He grabbed my daughter's shoulder and whispered, "The house isn't empty. It is surrounded by armed private security. Your mother knows." Before I tell you how I dismantled my own daughter's life piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family who built the throne they sit on. I am Vivian. I am 68 years old, and I am the founder and sole owner of the Sapphire Hotel Group. I sat at the head of the mahogany table in that dimly lit restaurant watching the color completely drain from my son-in-law Terrence's face. He was shaking so badly the ice in his water glass rattled against the crystal. My only daughter Denise stared at him in pure, unadulterated shock. "What do you mean she knows?" Denise hissed, pulling him down into the leather booth so the other wealthy patrons would not hear. "She is a confused old woman. She does not know anything." I set down my silver fork. I picked up my linen napkin and carefully dabbed the corners of my mouth. The smell of charred oak and expensive Wagyu beef filled the air, but my appetite was completely gone. I looked dead at the two people I had given my entire life to. Did you really think a woman who built a $60 million hospitality empire from a single foreclosed motel in 1992 would not know when her own daughter clones her master keys? I let the words hang in the air. The smooth jazz music playing over the restaurant speakers suddenly felt incredibly loud. The silence that fell over our private table was absolute. Denise froze. Her perfect, loving daughter smile melted away, revealing the greedy, desperate stranger she had truly become. "You really thought you could slip into my home and lock me out of my own life?" I asked, leaning forward. My voice was calm, but it carried the heavy weight of 40 years of hard-fought business battles. I have survived cutthroat real estate developers, racist bank managers who refused to give loans to black women, and 3 global economic crashes. I noticed your little hardware store detour the second you put my spare keys back on the wrong hook last Sunday. You always were sloppy, Denise. Denise did not apologize. She did not cry or beg for forgiveness. She just straightened her posture and dropped the dutiful act completely. Her eyes turned ice cold. She raised her hand and snapped her fingers toward the front entrance of the restaurant. The heavy oak doors of our private dining room swung open. 2 large men wearing gray medical scrubs walked in carrying a heavy canvas medical bag. Denise reached into her designer purse and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table right over my birthday card. "Read it and weep, Mom," she said, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth or guilt. "The judge signed the psychiatric hold this morning. Dr. Marcus Aris officially diagnosed you with severe advanced dementia. You are legally incompetent. Those orderlies are taking you to a locked memory care ward right now. Terrence and I have full legal conservatorship of your entire portfolio. Your reign is over." I looked down at the papers, the forged signatures, the fake medical history. My own flesh and blood was trying to chemically lobotomize me and bury me in a psychiatric ward just to get their hands on my bank accounts. Terrence finally found his nerve stepping out from behind his wife. "It is for your own good, Vivian," he said, trying to sound authoritative, trying to sound like the boss he desperately wanted to be. "You are losing your grip on reality. You cannot manage 30 luxury hotels across the East Coast anymore. We are stepping in to protect the family legacy before you run it into the ground." "Protect the legacy." I laughed, and the sound was so sharp it made Terrence flinch. I did not panic. I did not scream for help. I used our family history as a lethal weapon. "You are using Dr. Marcus Aris?" I asked, tapping the forged medical document with my manicured fingernail. "The same Marcus Aris whose underground plastic surgery clinic I bailed out of a massive malpractice lawsuit 10 years ago. Have you forgotten, Terrence? I paid $3 million in hush money out of my own pocket to keep that butcher out of federal prison because he was your college roommate, and you begged me to save your fragile ego. You think a psychiatric hold signed by a man I secretly own will stand up in a federal court for even 5 minutes? I have the receipts, Terrence. I always keep the receipts." Denise slammed her hands on the table, rattling the silverware. "It is a legally binding court order, Mom. The local police will drag you out of here in a straitjacket if you resist. You are going to a facility tonight, and we are taking over the board of directors tomorrow morning." I stared at the diamond necklace resting on her collarbone, the exact same necklace I bought her when she graduated from Spelman College. "You are trying to steal my life," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the tension. "Why? I gave you a massive trust fund. I bought you a sprawling mansion in Buckhead. I gave Terrence a corner office at my venture capital firm with a salary he never actually earned. Why are you trying to destroy your own mother?" Terrence smirked, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Because a trust fund is just an allowance, Vivian. We want the principal. We want the real money. And as for your federal court threat, it does not matter. The forged medical papers do not have to hold up forever. They only need to hold up for 48 hours. Long enough for me to bypass the board of directors and liquidate the flagship Sapphire Hotel downtown." I felt a sudden cold realization wash over me. Liquidate the flagship property. That building alone was worth $40 million. He was not just trying to take over the business and run it. He was trying to burn it down for fast cash. "Do you even know the history of the building you are trying to liquidate, Terrence?" I asked, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "That flagship hotel stands on the exact same city block where my grandfather was denied a commercial bank loan simply because of the color of his skin. I bought that land to prove a point. I built a monument to our excellence in a city that tried to keep us out of the boardrooms. You want to sell our legacy to the highest bidder to cover your own incompetence. You are not a businessman. You are a parasite feeding off the blood of my hard work." Terrence's face flushed a deep, angry red. "I am the one with the business degree, Vivian. I am the one who understands modern logistics and corporate restructuring. Your outdated emotional attachment to a piece of concrete is exactly why you need to be placed in a conservatorship. You let sentimentality blind your financial judgment. The market does not care about your grandfather. The market cares about liquidity and profit margins. The market cares about survival." I fired back. "Something you know absolutely nothing about because I shielded you from it. You sell that building and you put 300 hardworking people out on the street," I continued. "People who have worked for me since before you were born. Families who depend on those paychecks to survive." Terrence shrugged, showing absolutely zero remorse. "That sounds like a them problem." He nodded to the men in the gray scrubs. They stepped closer, blocking the only exit from our private booth. One of them reached into the canvas bag and pulled out a heavy sedative syringe. The sharp needle gleamed under the expensive restaurant chandeliers. I looked around the room, analyzing my escape routes. The waiter who had been serving us was conveniently gone. The restaurant manager was standing by the main bar, staring intently at the floor, completely ignoring what was happening in our section. Terrence had bought them off. He had paid them to look the other way, while his hired thugs dragged a screaming elderly woman out the back door under the guise of a tragic medical emergency. "Come quietly, Mom," Denise said, stepping back to let the large men approach me. "The medication will make you feel nice and relaxed. You will not even know what you are signing when you wake up tomorrow in your new padded room." I stood up, pushing my chair back. I was 68 years old, but I stood tall, refusing to cower. "You think I'm going to let you erase me, Denise?" I asked. "I built this empire with my bare hands. When your father Calvin died, I worked 20-hour days to make sure you never knew what poverty tasted like. I fought zoning boards, city councils, and corrupt bankers to secure our future. I did not survive all of that just to be taken down by a spoiled child and a weak man." Terrence laughed a cruel, ugly sound. "Your history lesson is very touching, Vivian, but it is over. Grab her arms," he ordered the orderlies. The two large men lunged forward. One reached for my shoulder, his massive hand clamping down on my tailored blazer. The other uncapped the syringe, preparing to plunge it into my arm. I braced myself, refusing to show them an ounce of fear. I stared directly into Denise's eyes, wanting her to see the exact moment she lost her mother forever. She did not look away. She just watched, waiting for the drugs to take me down. This was the reality of my birthday lunch. No cake, no celebration, just a calculated, brutal ambush designed to wipe my existence from the world and steal the empire I had bled for. They thought I was trapped. They thought my age made me an easy target. They thought they had accounted for every single variable in their greedy little scheme. But they had no idea what was about to happen next. They had no idea that while they were busy playing checkers, I had already set the board for a game of chess they could never win. The syringe moved closer to my skin. I did not blink. I just waited for the chaos to begin. Just as the needle grazed my skin, a deafening mechanical shriek ripped through the restaurant. The emergency fire alarm system triggered with a force that shook the mahogany walls. A split second later, the ceiling sprinklers erupted. Black, stagnant water that had been sitting in the pipes for years exploded downward, drenching the pristine dining room. Denise shrieked as the filthy water ruined her silk dress and washed away her perfect makeup. The sudden chaos was absolute. The orderlies flinched instinctively, raising their hands to shield their faces. That was all the opening I needed. I shoved the heavy wooden chair backward, knocking the orderly off balance. His boots slipped on the wet marble floor, and he crashed hard into the table, sending crystal glasses and forged documents flying. Before I could even turn toward the exit, a hand clamped down on my wrist. I prepared to fight, thinking it was Terrence, but a familiar voice cut through the blaring alarm. "Come on, Grandma, we have to move right now." I blinked through the spraying water. It was my 20-year-old grandson, Isaiah. I was wearing a white catering uniform, completely soaked through his eyes wide, with a desperate, frantic energy I had never seen in him before. He did not wait for my answer. He yanked me forward and we bolted. We sprinted toward the swinging doors of the kitchen. Terrence was shouting something behind us, but his voice was drowned out by the alarm and the panicked screams of the wealthy patrons scrambling for the exits. We pushed past shocked line cooks and sliding prep tables. The kitchen floor was a hazard of spilled grease and dropped plates, but Isaiah held my arm in a vice grip, keeping me steady. He shoved open the heavy steel emergency exit door, and the humid night air of Atlanta hit my face. A battered white catering van was idling illegally in the alleyway with the passenger door flung wide open. "Get in!" Isaiah yelled, practically throwing me into the passenger seat. He sprinted around the front of the van, leaped into the driver's seat, and slammed the gear shift into drive. The tires spun on the wet asphalt, shrieking, as we tore out of the narrow alley and merged recklessly into the downtown traffic. I sat in the passenger seat, trying to catch my breath. My tailored blazer was soaked. My heart was hammering a relentless rhythm against my ribs. I looked over at Isaiah, my grandson, Denise's only child. He was a cybersecurity junior at Georgia Tech, a quiet kid who usually spent family dinners buried in his phone, avoiding his father's overbearing lectures. Right now, his hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles were stark white under the streetlights. "What are you doing here, Isaiah?" I demanded, my voice sharp, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "How did you know to find me there?" He kept his eyes locked on the road, weaving the heavy van through the late-night traffic on Peachtree Street. "I have known about their plan for a week, Grandma. I heard Dad bragging to Mom in his home office about the forged medical records. I have been tracking his digital footprint ever since. I knew the exact time and place of the reservation. I pulled the fire alarm from the main control panel in the lobby. I stared at him, the reality of his actions settling heavily over me. You just assaulted a hired medical orderly and aided the escape of a woman who was legally declared a ward of the state an hour ago. Terrence will have the police looking for this van in 10 minutes. If they catch us, you are going to jail right alongside me." Isaiah let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Jail is the absolute least of our problems right now." He whipped the van around a sharp corner, heading south, away from the affluent neighborhoods and toward the industrial district. "Dad is not trying to lock you away because he wants to run the Sapphire Hotel Group. He does not care about the hospitality business or the legacy you built. He is doing this because he is a dead man walking." I wiped a streak of dirty sprinkler water from my forehead. "What are you talking about? I know Terrence is a weak businessman who burns through cash, but he is too much of a coward to get involved in anything truly dangerous." "You are wrong," Isaiah said, his voice dropping to a grim, terrified whisper. "You think his venture capital firm has been surviving on bad tech investments. It has not. 2 years ago, Dad got desperate. He started taking massive off-the-book loans from a private equity syndicate based out of Miami. He told Mom it was a bridge loan to cover his margins, but it was dirty money, Grandma, pure cartel cash. I was supposed to clean it through his legitimate real estate channels and return it with a 20% yield. Instead, he lost it all trying to short the commercial real estate market. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. How much money did he lose, Isaiah? $25 million, Isaiah replied. He glanced at me, and the sheer terror in his young eyes made my blood run cold. $25 million of cartel money is gone. The syndicate sent an enforcer to our house 3 days ago. I was upstairs listening through the vents. The man did not yell. He did not make threats. He just sat in our living room drinking coffee and told Dad that if the money was not returned by Friday at midnight, they would execute Dad, then they would execute Mom. Then they would execute me. The silence in the van was suffocating. Friday at midnight. That was exactly 48 hours away. That is why they need the flagship hotel, I said, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with ruthless clarity. The downtown property is valued at $40 million outright. He needs the conservatorship to bypass the board of directors and sign the deed directly over to the syndicate as a total repayment of his debt. Isaiah nodded, swallowing hard. The syndicate does not care about hotel management. They want the real estate to launder their own money through casino developments. Dad promised them the deed by tomorrow evening. If you were locked in a psychiatric ward, heavily sedated, and legally stripped of your rights, he would have full executive control to authorize the transfer. He was willing to sacrifice your mind, your freedom, and your life to buy his own survival. I looked out the window at the passing city lights. My own daughter. Denise knew the cartel was coming for them, and instead of coming to me for help, instead of asking her own mother to save them, she chose to chemicalize me and steal my empire. She was willing to let strange men drag me away in a straitjacket, just to avoid taking responsibility for her husband's criminal greed. "We cannot go to the police," I said, my mind shifting from shock to pure tactical survival. Terrence already bribed Marcus Aris to sign a legally binding psychiatric hold. He likely paid off a local judge to expedite the conservatorship order. If we walk into a police precinct right now, they will not see a kidnapped CEO. They will see an escaped dementia patient. They will hand me right back to Terrence and arrest you for kidnapping. Isaiah pulled the van into the dark parking lot of an abandoned strip mall on the outskirts of the city. He killed the engine and killed the headlights, plunging us into total darkness. He reached behind his seat and pulled out a sleek black laptop, flipping it open. The harsh blue light of the screen illuminated his face. "I know we cannot go to the cops," Isaiah said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "That is why I tried to access your personal offshore accounts this morning. I figured if I could move your liquid cash into a secure, decentralized server, we could use it to hire private military contractors or flee the country. But I could not get in, Grandma." "What do you mean you could not get in?" I asked, leaning over the center console to look at his screen. "I gave you the secondary encryption keys for your 18th birthday precisely so you could access emergency funds if something ever happened to me." "Something did happen to you," Isaiah replied, his voice tight with frustration. "Dad happened. He did not just forge your medical records. He executed a hostile digital takeover. When the judge signed that conservatorship order this afternoon, it triggered a legal mandate across all federal banking systems. Dad used it to wipe your digital identity clean." Isaiah turned the laptop screen toward me. I stared at the banking portals I had used for 20 years to build and manage the Sapphire Group. Every single account was highlighted in bright red text. Access denied. Account frozen. Legal authority transferred. "They canceled your black cards," Grandma Isaiah said softly. "They froze your offshore accounts. They revoked your corporate administrative access. I tried to route a small transfer through a shell company just to get us some cash for a hotel room tonight, but the system flagged it instantly. Terrence has a team of syndicate hackers monitoring your entire portfolio. If I try to breach the primary firewall again, they will track our location in less than 3 minutes." I leaned back against the headrest, staring at the red warning letters on the screen. The reality of the situation was absolute and terrifying. I had built a $60 million empire from the ground up. I had employed hundreds of people and shaped the skyline of Atlanta. But sitting in this stolen catering van in a dark parking lot, I had absolutely nothing. I was a fugitive from the law, wearing a ruined suit, with no money, no phone, and a bounty on my head. "You officially do not exist," Grandma Isaiah whispered, closing the laptop. "You are a ghost, and we have exactly 48 hours to figure out how a ghost is going to stop a cartel from taking everything." I let his words wash over me. A ghost. That is exactly what Denise and Terrence wanted me to be, a phantom locked away in a white padded room, unable to speak, unable to fight back while they picked the meat off my bones. They thought stripping away my money and my titles would leave me powerless. But they fundamentally misunderstood what power actually is. Power is not a bank account or a platinum credit card. Power is the ability to look at a burning building and figure out how to forge the fire into a weapon. I turned to my grandson. He was trembling, exhaustion and fear radiating from his young frame. He had thrown away his future, his college degree, and his own safety just to pull me out of the fire. "Listen to me, Isaiah," I said, placing my hand firmly over his shaking fingers. "You did exactly the right thing today. You saved my life. But you need to understand the war we just entered. Terrence thinks he has won because he holds a piece of paper signed by a corrupt judge. He thinks the syndicate will protect him once he hands over my property. He is a fool, a cornered rat wearing a tie. "What is our next move?" Isaiah asked, his voice finally steadying. "Our next move is not running," I replied, my tone turning to absolute ice. "They want to treat me like a ghost. Then we are going to haunt them." Terrence locked me out of the digital network, but he forgot that I built the physical foundation of this company. I know every wire, every hidden camera, and every tunnel in the Sapphire Group headquarters. We are not going to hide. We are going to strike back. Isaiah stared at me, realizing that I was not backing down. I was preparing to tear my own empire apart to save it. We sat in the dark van as the rain began to fall against the windshield, waiting for the dawn to break. The 48-hour countdown had officially begun. The clock on the dashboard of the stolen van read exactly 2 in the morning when Isaiah killed the engine. We were parked in a narrow delivery alley 2 blocks away from the Sapphire Tower. The rain was still coming down in thick, heavy sheets, washing the grime of the city into the gutters. I zipped up my soaked blouse and stepped out into the freezing downpour. "Follow me close and do not make a sound," I whispered. We moved through the shadows of the alleyway, pressing our backs against the cold brick walls of the adjacent buildings. The towering glass structure of my flagship hotel loomed ahead of us, piercing the dark Atlanta sky like a monolithic spear. From the outside, it looked like a sleeping giant. But I knew better. I could see the faint silhouettes of armed men pacing the lobby behind the tinted glass. Terrence had locked down the front doors, the loading docks, and the underground parking garage. I thought he had sealed the fortress. He was dead wrong. I led Isaiah to a rusted iron grate hidden behind a row of overflowing industrial dumpsters. When I drafted the blueprints for this tower in 2005, the City Planning Commission forced me to integrate the foundation with the remnants of an old textile factory. I crouched down, gripping the freezing iron bars of the grate. "Help me lift this," I told my grandson. Isaiah grabbed the bars and heaved. The heavy grate scraped against the concrete, revealing a pitch-black vertical drop. A rusted steel ladder descended into the darkness. The smell of damp earth and old copper drifted up from the abyss. "This is an old laundry ventilation shaft," I explained, swinging my leg over the edge and gripping the wet ladder rungs. "It runs parallel to the main elevator banks all the way up to the executive floors. The security cameras do not cover the utility voids. We are going in." The descent was suffocating. We climbed down into the subterranean belly of the building, our shoes slipping on the damp metal. Once we hit the bottom, we entered a narrow concrete tunnel lined with massive humming pipes. I walked briskly, memorizing the turns, tracing the hidden veins of the building I had brought to life. We reached the primary maintenance shaft that ran vertically up the center of the tower. I looked up. The service ladder stretched endlessly upward, disappearing into the shadows. 40 stories. "Are you going to be okay to climb this?" Grandma Isaiah asked, his voice echoing softly in the concrete tube. I grabbed the first metal rung. I did not carry 50-pound bags of flour up 3 flights of stairs in my 20s just to pass out in my own hotel in my 60s. "Start climbing." The physical toll was brutal. By the time we reached the 15th floor, my lungs were burning fiercely. My arms ached with a deep, sharp pain. We climbed in absolute silence, stopping only when the sounds of heavy boots echoed from the floors directly on the other side of the thin drywall. Around the 25th floor, we froze entirely. A heavy metallic slam vibrated through the wall right next to my head. A syndicate enforcer had just kicked open a utility door. I held my breath, pressing my face against the cold metal ladder. I could hear 2 men talking in thick Miami accents, complaining about the rain and the long night shift. Their voices were muffled, but the clear click of a rifle being loaded was unmistakably terrifying. I looked down at Isaiah clinging to the ladder below me. His eyes were wide with sheer panic. I gave him a single sharp nod, telling him to hold the line. We waited in agonizing silence for 10 full minutes until the heavy boots finally walked away. We resumed the climb. By the time we pried open the ventilation grate on the 40th floor, my hands were bleeding and my muscles were shaking violently. We tumbled out of the dirty shaft and onto the thick plush carpeting of the executive corridor. We were standing in the absolute heart of my empire. The walls were lined with original art and polished cherry wood. At the end of the hall were the frosted double doors of the chief executive office. My office. We crept down the silent hallway. Isaiah pulled a small digital decoding device from his backpack. We reached the heavy oak doors and slipped inside quietly. The office was exactly as I had left it. The panoramic windows overlooked the glittering sprawl of the city. Behind my massive mahogany desk was a seamless wall panel, concealing a solid titanium vault. "Get to work," I whispered, pointing at the digital keypad next to the vault door. Isaiah connected his device to the keypad. Lines of green code began running across his small screen. "I have to brute force the encryption," he whispered, his fingers tapping frantically. "It will take 3 minutes." Suddenly, the sound of the corridor doors swinging open echoed through the quiet suite. Heavy footsteps approached the office. Isaiah let out a panicked gasp. "Get under the desk," I commanded, shoving him downward out of sight. I flattened myself into the dark recess between a tall bookshelf and the heavy velvet curtains, just as the office doors swung open aggressively. Terrence walked in. My blood boiled instantly. My son-in-law was wearing a custom-tailored suit, looking completely disheveled. He walked straight over to my private liquor cabinet, grabbed a crystal tumbler, and poured himself a massive measure of my $2,000 scotch. He collapsed into my leather executive chair, the very chair I had sat in while negotiating millions of dollars in deals. He propped his feet up on my mahogany desk and pulled out his cell phone. "Yeah, it is me," Terrence said, his voice arrogant but trembling slightly as he spoke to whoever was on the other end of the line. "The building is totally locked down. Your guys are patrolling the perimeter. No one is getting in or out." He took a long gulp of the scotch. "I told you the transfer will be finalized tomorrow night. My wife is securing the conservatorship right now. The old bat put up a fight at the restaurant, but the sedative took her out completely. We have her stashed in a secure, locked facility. By tomorrow morning, she will be legally declared a vegetable. The flagship property deed will be wired to your shell company by 10 o'clock tomorrow night." I stood in the shadows, digging my fingernails into my palms to stop myself from lunging forward and strangling him. He was sitting in my chair, drinking my liquor and bragging to a cartel boss about burying me alive. "Just keep your enforcers on site until the wire clears," Terrence continued, his voice growing increasingly defensive. "I know what I am doing. Vivian was stubborn, but she is permanently out of the game. I am the man in charge now." He hung up the phone, letting out a ragged sigh of relief. He sat there for another minute, rubbing his temples, before finally standing up and walking out of the office to check on the guards down the hall. The second the door clicked shut, Isaiah scrambled out from under the desk. The decoding device on the vault keypad beeped a soft green tone. The heavy titanium locks disengaged with a solid mechanical thud. I grabbed the handle and pulled the vault open. Inside, resting on a velvet pillow, was a single sealed leather folder. I reached in and pulled it out. I opened the flap quickly. The heavy parchment paper of the golden share certificate was right there, completely untouched. It was the absolute key to my empire, a physical legal document that granted the bearer total unchecked executive authority over the Sapphire Group. "We have it," I whispered, sliding the folder into the inside pocket of my damp blouse. "Let us get out of here before Terrence comes back." We turned toward the office door, ready to slip back into the hallway and descend the 40 stories of total darkness. We just needed to reach the laundry shafts. We just needed 10 more seconds of luck. I took one step toward the exit when the overhead fluorescent lights violently snapped on. The sudden blinding brightness flooded the executive office, eliminating every single shadow we could hide in. Isaiah froze. My heart slammed into my throat. Standing in the doorway, blocking the only exit from the room, was my daughter, Denise. She was dressed in a sleek black suit, her makeup perfectly reapplied, looking exactly like the ruthless corporate predator she always wanted to be. She stared at us, her eyes sweeping over our dirty, soaked clothes and the open titanium vault behind my desk. The silence in the room was absolute and terrifying. It stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. I looked at the little girl I had raised, the woman I had protected and provided for her entire life. There was no shock on her face. There was no guilt. There was only cold, hard calculation. "Well, well, well," Denise said, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. "I told Terrence he was an idiot for underestimating you, Mom. I told him you would never just lay down and die in some cheap motel room. I knew you would come back for the crown." I stood tall, refusing to let her see my fear. "Get out of my way, Denise. You are in over your head. You do not understand the people you and your husband are dealing with." She smiled a sharp, wicked smile that made my blood run cold. She reached into her designer leather purse. Her hand emerged holding a sleek black pistol. She racked the slide with a terrifying practiced ease and pointed the barrel directly at my chest. "I understand perfectly, Mom," she whispered. The rain stopped, but the Atlanta humidity was suffocating as I handed $70 in damp cash to a clerk behind a thick layer of bulletproof glass. We took a room on the ground floor of a decaying motel in College Park. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, and the air smelled heavily of stale cigarette smoke and industrial bleach. I locked the flimsy wooden door and slid the rusted metal chain into place. It was a completely pathetic defense against a heavily armed cartel, but it was all we had right now. Isaiah collapsed onto the sagging mattress. He pulled his laptop from his soaked backpack and plugged the charger into a flickering wall outlet. The 48-hour countdown was ticking away violently in my head. Every single second Terrence held my legal authority was another second closer to the absolute destruction of my entire life. I paced the narrow space while my grandson typed furiously. We needed liquid capital immediately. Without cash, we could not fight back. We could not hire ruthless attorneys or private security to reclaim my building. "Get into the secondary operating accounts," I instructed him, my voice tight with urgency. "Bypass the domestic servers completely and go straight for the Cayman Island reserves. I set those up in 2008 during the housing crash specifically for a disaster scenario exactly like this one." Isaiah nodded, his eyes locked on the harsh blue light of the laptop screen. His fingers moved with a desperate, frantic speed. He routed our digital connection through 4 different virtual private networks, trying to mask our digital footprint from Terrence and his hired cartel hackers. For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the small room was the rapid clicking of the keyboard and the heavy mechanical hum of the broken air conditioner in the window. Then Isaiah abruptly stopped typing. His shoulders dropped heavily. He let out a harsh, frustrated breath and slammed his closed fist against the cheap wooden nightstand. "It is absolutely no use, Grandma," he said, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "I hit the outer wall, but there is a massive secondary defense grid. Terrence did not just freeze your personal bank accounts. He anticipated that we would try to move the offshore money tonight. He locked down the entire corporate network using a military-grade biometric firewall." I walked over to the bed and stared down at the screen. A massive glowing red shield emblem blocked every single financial portal. The system demanded a dual authentication that I could no longer provide. My thumbprint alone was completely useless now. The corrupt judge had legally stripped my biometric authority the moment he signed that fraudulent psychiatric hold at the restaurant. Terrence effectively held the keys to the entire kingdom. "There has to be a backdoor in the programming," I insisted, refusing to accept defeat. I paid $5 million to build that network from the ground up. I demanded redundant fail-safes for emergencies. I never give anyone absolute, unquestioned control, not even myself. Isaiah rubbed his tired, bloodshot eyes. "There is a fail-safe, Grandma," he explained quietly. "The system is asking for a physical override to bypass the digital lock. It requires a master authentication token to bypass the board of directors and release the frozen funds." He looked up at me with a look of absolute sheer despair. "It requires the physical golden share certificate." The golden share. The words hung heavily in the stale motel air. I felt a cold, sharp smile slowly spread across my face. Terrence thought he was a brilliant modern tactician, but he was fighting a war on a battlefield I had personally designed decades ago, when I incorporated the Sapphire Hotel Group 30 years ago. I knew the white male-dominated hospitality industry would eventually try a hostile takeover. I knew they would try to force me out of my own company once it became highly profitable, so I legally baked a poison pill right into the corporate charter. The golden share was a single physical stock certificate that held 51% of the absolute voting power. It trumped every single board member. It trumped every legal conservatorship order. It completely trumped Terrence. Whoever held that piece of paper physically in their hands controlled the entire $60 million empire. "I know exactly where it is," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, focused whisper. "It is locked inside a titanium vault behind the mahogany desk in my personal corporate office, on the 40th floor of the Sapphire Tower." Isaiah shook his head vigorously, his eyes wide with renewed panic. "Grandma, that is complete suicide. We cannot go back to the headquarters tonight." I tapped into the building security feeds right before Terrence locked me out of the camera network. "The place is completely occupied. Isaiah turned his laptop toward me and pulled up a cached video file from just an hour ago. The security footage showed the grand marble lobby of my flagship hotel. It was crawling with men dressed in dark tactical gear. They were clearly not standard hotel security guards. These men carried suppressed submachine guns and moved with terrifying military precision. Syndicate enforcers, Isaiah explained, his voice trembling as he pointed at the screen. The Miami cartel did not just send one debt collector to threaten Dad. They sent an entire heavily armed occupation force to secure the building until the property transfer clears tomorrow night. They have men stationed on the loading docks. They have armed guards securing the elevator banks. They have a lethal patrol team sweeping the executive floors every 15 minutes. We are completely outgunned and outmatched. He slammed the laptop shut and stood up, pacing the small room like a trapped animal. We cannot do this, Grandma. We need to run right now. We need to get on a cheap bus and disappear into Mexico or Canada before they find us. If we walk into that building tonight, we are walking directly into our own graves. Terrence has already won the war. He has the court order giving him control. He has the cartel backing him with weapons. He has my own mother helping him destroy you. We have absolutely nothing left. I stepped directly into his path, forcing him to stop pacing and face me. I looked my grandson dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of authority I possessed. I did not raise a coward, Isaiah. I did not spend my entire youth fighting tooth and nail against a system designed to crush black wealth, just so you could suggest we run away and hide like beaten dogs in the night. I grabbed my ruined blazer from the chair and put it back on, smoothing the lapels. My clothes were damp and wrinkled, but I wore them like a suit of armor. You think I am intimidated by a few hired guns and cheap tactical vests? I asked him, my tone radiating absolute, unwavering authority. When I bought my first motel in 1992, the local banks laughed right in my face. They told me a black woman had absolutely no business trying to build luxury real estate in the heart of Atlanta. So I worked 3 exhausting jobs. I scrubbed toilets in white-owned hotels by day, and I balanced my own complex accounting books by night. I sacrificed sleep, personal relationships, and my own health so your mother could wear Prada shoes to her private high school. I stepped closer to him until he was forced to look at the unyielding determination burning in my eyes. I paid for your mother's extravagant, ungrateful lifestyle, and I paid for Terrence to play businessman because I loved my family unconditionally. But I will not let their greedy, reckless criminal mistakes burn down the monument I built to our excellence. No syndicate thug in a cheap suit is keeping me out of my own building. I built that tower from the dirt up. I know every structural weakness in the foundation. I know every single blind spot in the camera grid. I know the blueprints intimately because I drew them myself. Isaiah swallowed hard. The sheer panic in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a reluctant, profound respect for the woman standing in front of him. You really think we can get past a cartel occupation force? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I do not think, Isaiah. I know, I replied firmly. We are not going to fight them bullet for bullet in the lobby. We are going to outsmart them from the shadows. Terrence thinks he locked the fortress to keep us out, but he does not realize he locked himself inside a cage with the architect. I walked over to the cheap laminate desk and grabbed the small notepad provided by the motel. I took a pen and began drawing a rough schematic of the Sapphire Tower underground levels. There is an old industrial laundry chute that connects the sub-basement directly to the executive floors, I explained, tracing a harsh, dark line down the paper. The city inspectors demanded it be sealed with thick concrete 10 years ago, but I paid the private contractors to leave a hollow access panel hidden securely behind the commercial dryers. It bypasses the entire digital security grid. Terrence does not know it exists because he never bothered to learn the operational mechanics of the business he is currently trying to steal. Isaiah leaned over the desk, studying my crude but accurate drawing. If we can get into that chute safely, I can use my portable descrambler to hack the vault keypad directly, he murmured, his highly technical brain finally overriding his paralyzing fear. But the vertical ascent will take at least 45 minutes of climbing in total darkness. If a syndicate patrol team hears us moving inside the walls, they will just shoot straight through the drywall. We would be trapped inside a vertical coffin with no way out. Then we better move very quietly, I stated flatly, refusing to entertain failure. We spend the rest of the day resting here and gathering our physical strength. When darkness falls, we head back into the city. We breach the perimeter at 2 in the morning when the guard shift rotates and they are tired. We climb the shaft, we crack the vault, and we take back my company. We go in tonight. Denise stood there perfectly still, the polished steel of the handgun glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights of my office. She did not look like a scared wife caught in her husband's criminal mess. She looked like a cold, calculating predator who had finally cornered her prey. Beside me, Isaiah let out a sharp, terrified gasp. He stumbled backward, hitting the edge of my mahogany desk, his hands raised defensively in the air. "Mom, what are you doing?" he cried out, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Put that down! This is Grandma!" Denise did not even glance at her son. Her eyes remained locked on my chest, the barrel of the gun perfectly steady. "Shut your mouth, Isaiah." She snapped, her tone completely devoid of any maternal instinct. "You chose your side when you pulled that fire alarm and ruined my afternoon. Now stand perfectly still before you get hurt." I stepped directly in front of my grandson, shielding his body with my own. I did not raise my hands. I did not beg. I felt a surge of absolute volcanic rage incinerate any remaining fear I had. "You are pointing a loaded firearm at the boy you carried in your own body for 9 months, I said, my voice vibrating with a lethal, dangerous calm. "You are holding your own flesh and blood at gunpoint for a weak, pathetic man who gambled away your entire inheritance on a cartel debt. Have you completely lost your mind, Denise?" Denise let out a short, bitter laugh. "Do not lecture me about family loyalty, Vivian. Do not you dare stand there and pretend you know anything about being a mother. You were never a mother to me. You were a chief executive officer. You loved your diesel trucks and your shipping contracts a hell of a lot more than you ever loved me." She took a step closer, the gun still aimed directly at my heart. "When I was 7 years old, I waited on the front porch for 3 hours in the freezing rain because you forgot to pick me up from school. You were too busy inspecting a new fleet of freight carriers. When I graduated high school, you showed up 30 minutes late smelling like engine grease and cheap airport coffee. You built a logistics empire and you left me completely alone inside it." I glared at her, refusing to absorb her fabricated victimhood. "Do not use your privileged childhood as an excuse for your criminal greed." I fired back my words, hitting her like physical blows. "You think I wanted to miss your ballet recitals?" I was sitting in smoke-filled boardrooms surrounded by white men who refused to even shake my hand. I was fighting tooth and nail negotiating interstate shipping lanes just so you could sleep in a mansion with a silk canopy over your bed. I worked 18-hour days so you would never have to bow your head to anyone in this world. And what do you do with that freedom? You get on your knees and lick the boots of Miami cartel thugs to clean up your husband's miserable mistakes. Denise's face flushed a violent, angry red. Her finger tightened visibly on the trigger. "I am taking this company to survive, Mom. Terrence made a mistake, but we are fixing it tonight. The syndicate takes the central logistics hub tomorrow, and our debt is wiped clean. I am not going to let your ridiculous pride get my family killed." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the office swung open wider. Terrence walked in, flanked by 2 massive syndicate enforcers carrying suppressed rifles. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at his wife holding a gun on his mother-in-law and his own son. A cruel, arrogant smirk spread across his face. "Well, I see you found the rats hiding in our walls," he said, walking casually toward my desk. He did not look surprised to see us. He looked victorious. I glared at him. "You are a dead man walking, Terrence. I have the golden share certificate in my pocket. Your forged psychiatric hold means absolutely nothing now. I hold the physical voting power to block any property transfer you try to make with the syndicate. You have lost." Terrence chuckled, shaking his head. He pulled a sleek digital tablet from his jacket pocket and tossed it onto the polished wood of my desk. He gestured for me to look at it. I did not move. He sighed dramatically and tapped the screen, waking it up. "You always think you are the smartest person in the room, Vivian," he said, leaning against the edge of the desk. "You think I relied entirely on a fake medical document. That was just plan A to keep things quiet. But I knew you might put up a fight, so I prepared plan B." He tapped the screen again, bringing up a series of highly detailed financial spreadsheets. "While you were busy scrubbing toilets and building this company, I was paying very close attention to your digital infrastructure. Yesterday, I planted 30 forged tax documents on your personal highly secured server. Documents that show you have been systematically defrauding the Internal Revenue Service for the past 15 years. Millions of dollars in phantom offshore accounts, fake vendor invoices, massive tax evasion." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. The The documents were flawless. They bore my digital signature, my routing numbers, and my corporate seal. It was a perfectly executed digital frame job. "If you do not hand over the golden share right now," Terrence continued, his voice dripping with sadistic pleasure, "I am going to hit send on this tablet. Every single piece of fabricated evidence will be instantly routed to the Financial Crimes Division of the IRS. With the current political climate, they will absolutely crucify a wealthy black female CEO. They will freeze every asset you have ever touched. You will be arrested, indicted, and you will die of old age alone in a federal prison cell." "You are bluffing," I said, though the knot in my stomach tightened. "The federal government takes months to investigate tax fraud. The cartel is coming for your head tomorrow night." Terrence shrugged casually. "Maybe, but I am not leaving this room without that certificate." He nodded to the 2 armed enforcers standing by the door. They raised their rifles, pointing the laser sights directly at Isaiah's chest. My grandson froze, the breath catching painfully in his throat. Terrence reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick physical property deed and a heavy gold fountain pen. He slammed them down on the desk right next to the tablet. "Here is your ultimate ultimatum." Vivian, Terrence said, his eyes turning completely dead. "You sign this deed right now, transferring the central logistics hub and the golden share entirely to my shell company. If you refuse, I press send on this tablet and guarantee you rot in federal prison. And then I am going to have these 2 gentlemen shoot your grandson in the chest right here in this office. I will tell the police I caught a deranged intruder trying to break into the corporate vault and acted in pure self-defense." "No, Grandma," Isaiah yelled, his voice cracking with terror. "Do not give it to him. We can fight them." "Shut up," Isaiah Denise snapped, keeping her pistol aimed directly at my face. "Sign the paper, Mom. Do it right now, or I swear to God I will let him kill your precious grandson." I looked at my daughter, the girl I had braided hair for, the girl I had stayed up all night nursing through fevers. She was completely gone. In her place stood a ruthless, cowardly monster willing to watch her own child take a bullet for a quick payout. I looked at Terrence, who was grinning like a hyena who had just stolen a lion's kill. And finally I looked at Isaiah. He was shaking violently, tears streaming down his face, but he was standing tall, trying to be brave for me. I could take a bullet. I could take the humiliation of a federal indictment. I could take losing every single dollar I had ever earned. But I could absolutely not let my grandson die on the floor of my office. He was my blood. He was my legacy. I slowly reached into my damp blazer pocket. I pulled out the heavy leather folder containing the golden share certificate. I tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. I picked up the gold fountain pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name on the bottom line of the property deed, legally transferring $40 million of my life's work directly into the hands of a criminal. Terrence snatched this paper off the desk, immediately inspecting the signature with hungry, greedy eyes. He let out a loud, triumphant laugh. He folded the deed and slipped it into his jacket pocket alongside the golden share. "Excellent choice, Vivian," he sneered. "You finally learned how to be a good team player." "You have what you want," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Now let Isaiah go." Terrence chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, I am afraid I cannot do that just yet. The syndicate needs to verify the deed transfer tomorrow night at the closing dinner. I cannot have you 2 running around the city causing problems until the money clears my account." He nodded to the armed enforcers. They lunged forward, grabbing Isaiah and me by the arms. They dragged us roughly out of the executive office and down the dark corridor. Denise followed closely behind her gun, still drawn, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. They hauled us toward the heavy reinforced steel door of the primary corporate server room. The enforcers shoved us violently inside. The room was massive, filled with towering racks of blinking computer servers. The air was already warm and thick. Terrence stepped into the doorway holding a heavy magnetic keycard. "I am shutting down the ventilation and the climate control in this room," Terrence said, tapping the keycard against his palm. "The servers run extremely hot. By tomorrow afternoon, the temperature in here will easily exceed 120 degrees. You can sit in the dark and think about your legacy while we finalize the sale. If you are lucky, you might still be breathing when we leave the country." He slammed the heavy steel door shut. The massive magnetic locks engaged with a terrifying terminal clank. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a sickly yellow glow over the rows of humming machinery. The ventilation fans above us slowly spun to a dead halt. The temperature in the room instantly began to rise. We were completely trapped in a steel box left to suffocate while my family sold my empire to a criminal syndicate. The heavy magnetic locks on the server room door engaged with a sickening thud that reverberated through the thick steel walls. I stood in the dim yellow glow of the emergency lights, listening to the absolute silence left in the wake of Terrence walking away. The only sound in the massive room was the low, oppressive hum of 30 server racks working overtime. Terrence had meant exactly what he said. He had killed the climate control. Within 5 minutes, the air grew incredibly thick. Within 10 minutes, it felt like standing inside a running oven. Isaiah threw his hands against his head, gripping his hair tightly. He backed away from the heavy steel door, pacing the narrow aisle between the humming machines. He kicked a discarded wire spool, sending it skittering across the raised floorboards. He was breathing much too fast, pulling the thin, hot air into his lungs in ragged, panicked gasps. "We are going to die in here, Grandma," he cried, his voice echoing off the metal panels. "We are literally going to cook to death. He has the deed. He has your signature. He is going to hand the flagship over to the Miami Syndicate, and they are going to leave our bodies rotting in this basement. I should have never brought you here. I should have made us run. This is entirely my fault." I did not panic. Panic is a luxury reserved for people who have never had to fight for their lives. I took off my ruined damp blazer and tossed it onto the floor. I rolled up the sleeves of my silk blouse. "Stop crying, Isaiah," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip through the suffocating heat. "Stand up straight and look at me right now." He froze his chest, heaving his eyes wide and terrified. I walked over to him, grabbing him firmly by both shoulders. "Your grandfather Calvin did not take a bullet in the shoulder, defending our very first business from a racist mob in 1978, just so his only grandson could sit down and suffocate inside a corporate server room," I told him, staring directly into his soul. "We built our wealth by surviving things designed to kill us. Terrence thinks he is a mastermind because he turned off the air conditioning. He thinks he locked us in a high-tech tomb. But he forgot that I approved the architectural blueprints for this entire building. I know exactly how this room breathes." Isaiah wiped the sweat pouring down his forehead. "What do you mean, how it breathes?" When we upgraded the digital infrastructure in 2012, I explained, walking over to the massive air intake vents set low into the reinforced concrete wall. I refused to let the contractors seal the original archaic HVAC system. I knew relying entirely on digital climate control was a critical vulnerability, so I forced them to leave the analog ventilation shafts intact just behind these grates. They run straight up the spine of the tower and connect directly to the main breaker room on the ground floor. Isaiah stared at the heavy iron grates blocking the vents. "They are bolted directly into the concrete, Grandma. We do not have a single tool. We cannot unscrew them." "We do not need to unscrew them," I replied, turning my attention to the nearest towering server rack. "We just need to overload the magnetic lock on the main door." Terrence disabled the keycard reader from the outside, but the magnetic seal relies on a continuous closed-circuit electrical loop. If we hit that circuit with a massive raw surge of power, the magnet will instantly demagnetize and the door will pop right open. Isaiah blinked, his engineering mind finally catching up to my strategy. "You want to short-circuit a military-grade magnetic door using raw power from a running server rack. The voltage required for that would easily exceed 400 volts. If we touch a live wire, we will be electrocuted instantly." "Then we better be extremely careful," I stated, walking behind the humming server rack. "Help me pull off this back panel. We have work to do." The heat in the room was rapidly becoming unbearable. The temperature had easily crossed 100 degrees. My silk blouse was clinging to my back, completely drenched in sweat. Every breath felt like inhaling dry fire. My chest ached and my vision blurred slightly at the edges, but I refused to slow down. I grabbed the edge of the metal casing behind the server rack and pulled with every ounce of strength I had left. Isaiah grabbed the other side, and together we ripped the heavy panel away, exposing a dense thicket of thick, colorful electrical wires. "Which ones carry the main power load?" I asked, pointing at the tangle of cables. Isaiah leaned in, squinting through the sweat dripping into his eyes. "The thick red and black cables running from the primary power supply unit," he said, pointing to two massive cords clamped securely to the metal frame. "But they are insulated. We need to strip the rubber casing to expose the raw copper wire." I looked around the room, searching for anything sharp. My eyes landed on the discarded wire spool Isaiah had kicked earlier. The edge of the plastic spool was cracked and jagged. I picked it up, snapped the sharpest piece of plastic off, and handed it to my grandson. "Strip the wires," I ordered. Isaiah grabbed the sharp plastic and went to work. His hands were shaking, but he sawed relentlessly at the thick rubber insulation. The heat in the room was escalating to critical levels. The servers were whining loudly, their internal fans failing to cool the overheating motherboards. The air was getting dangerously thin. My head pounded with a vicious rhythmic ache, but I stood right beside him, holding the thick cables steady while he cut. Finally, the rubber gave way, exposing a long section of gleaming raw copper wire. Sparks immediately popped and hissed as the current hit the humid air. "Okay, Grandma, I have the live wires," Isaiah gasped, wiping his face with his soaked shirt. "Now we have to connect them directly to the control box next to the door, but the cables are not long enough to reach across the room." "Then we bring the server rack to the door," I said, planting my hands on the heavy metal frame. "Push, Isaiah. Push like your life depends on it." We put our shoulders against the massive metal rack. It weighed at least 600 pounds. We pushed with everything we had, our shoes slipping on the raised floorboards. The metal frame groaned and scraped violently against the floor. Every inch was a grueling, agonizing battle. My muscles screamed in protest. My heart hammered dangerously fast. But the image of Denise holding a gun on my grandson fueled a burning, explosive strength inside me. We shoved the rack across the room inch by agonizing inch until it sat directly next to the heavy steel door. Isaiah grabbed the exposed copper wires, wrapping his hands in his dry uniform shirt to avoid the lethal current. He pried the plastic cover off the door control box, revealing the intricate green circuit board inside. "When I touch these wires to the main relay, the surge is going to blow the entire board," he warned, his voice trembling. "It will be loud and it will throw sparks everywhere. You need to pull the door handle exactly when the circuit pops. If you miss the timing, the backup battery will instantly re-engage the magnet, and we will be locked in here forever." I grabbed the heavy metal handle of the door, planting my feet firmly. "Do it," I commanded. Isaiah jammed the raw copper wires directly into the center of the circuit board. A blinding flash of blue light exploded from the box. A deafening crack echoed through the room, followed immediately by a shower of hot yellow sparks. The smell of burning ozone and melting plastic filled the air. The heavy magnetic seal groaned loudly. I yanked the handle backward with every fiber of my being. The steel door ripped open. We tumbled out of the server room and onto the cool, polished floor of the executive corridor. Fresh air rushed over us, hitting my lungs like a physical wave of relief. I lay on the carpet, gasping for breath, staring up at the ceiling. We were alive. We were out. Isaiah collapsed next to me, panting heavily, his hands blackened with soot and burns. "You actually did it, Grandma." He wheezed, a weak, incredulous smile breaking across his face. "You really beat the lock." I forced myself to sit up, ignoring the deep ache radiating through my bones. "I am not done beating them yet," I said, pulling myself to my feet. "Terrence thinks he trapped us on the top floor, but the syndicate patrol will not check the server room until morning. They think we are dead. That gives us a massive tactical advantage." We moved silently down the hallway, retracing our steps to the utility shaft we had used to infiltrate the building. The descent was infinitely harder than the climb. My body was completely depleted of energy, but pure sheer willpower kept my hands gripping the rusted metal rungs. We climbed down the 40 stories in absolute darkness, navigating the hidden vertical tunnels of the Sapphire Tower, while the heavily armed cartel enforcers patrolled the carpeted hallways just inches away. We reached the sub-basement and crawled through the narrow laundry access chute, pushing our way out through the heavy iron grate and back into the delivery alley. The rain had finally stopped. The dark sky was just beginning to turn a pale, bruised purple. The sun was rising over the skyline of Atlanta. I stood in the alleyway, taking a deep, steadying breath of the cool morning air. I looked at the sleek silver watch on my wrist. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. Isaiah leaned against the brick wall, catching his breath. He pulled his damaged laptop from his backpack, checking the offline clock. "Terrence is meeting the syndicate bosses at the penthouse for the closing dinner at 8 o'clock tonight," he said, his voice laced with dread. "That means we have exactly 14 hours until he hands over the physical deed and finalizes the legal transfer." 14 hours, I repeated, staring up at the towering glass facade of my hotel. 14 hours until Terrence hands over my entire legacy to a violent criminal organization. 14 hours until my daughter permanently signs away the empire I built with my blood. We have absolutely no money, Grandma. Isaiah reminded me, bringing us back to the harsh reality of our situation. We have no phones, we have no cars, we are standing in an alleyway wearing dirty clothes with a heavily armed cartel occupying our building. How do we stop a multi-million-dollar wire transfer in 14 hours without a single resource? I looked at my grandson, a fierce, unstoppable fire igniting in my chest. Terrence stole my bank accounts and my digital authority, I said, straightening my ruined collar. But he forgot that a true empire is not built on routing numbers or plastic cards. It is built on people. It is built on decades of loyalty and respect. He thinks I am poor today. I am about to show him exactly how rich I truly am. Come with me. We have an army to build. The sun was fully above the Atlanta skyline, now casting a harsh, bright light over our ruined clothes. We had exactly 13 hours and 45 minutes left. We were standing in a damp alleyway, completely stripped of our wealth, our digital identities, and our transportation. We did not have a single dollar bill between us. We did not have a cell phone to call for help, even if there was anyone left to call. Terrence and Denise had systematically dismantled my $60 million empire overnight and handed the keys to a Miami cartel. They thought they had left me with absolutely nothing. They were wrong. Follow me, I told Isaiah, turning my back on the towering glass facade of the Sapphire headquarters. Keep your head down and walk fast. Where are we going, Grandma? He asked, jogging slightly to keep up with my determined pace. We are miles away from anyone who can help us. The police are probably already looking for this catering van, and Terrence definitely has cartel scouts patrolling the downtown perimeter. We are not staying downtown, I replied, keeping my eyes locked straight ahead. We are walking to West Atlanta. We walked for nearly 2 hours. The polished concrete and luxury storefronts of the financial district gradually gave way to cracked sidewalks, faded brick facades, and the heavy rhythmic sounds of the working-class city waking up. My legs ached with a deep, bone-tired exhaustion from climbing 40 flights of stairs and escaping a suffocating server room. My silk blouse was stained with soot and grease from the ventilation shafts. My expensive tailored blazer was completely ruined. But I did not slow my pace for a single second. I walked with the posture of a chief executive officer stepping into a boardroom. We finally turned a corner onto a bustling street lined with auto repair shops and corner stores. I pointed to a low-slung cinder block building at the end of the block. A faded neon sign buzzed above the door reading Mama's Kitchen. It was a 24-hour local diner that had been a staple in the black community since the late 80s. Isaiah looked at the grease-stained windows and then back at me. Grandma, we cannot even afford a cup of coffee in there. What are we doing here? We are cashing in 30 years of investments, I said, grabbing the heavy metal handle of the diner door. I pushed the door open. The bell above the frame chimed loudly, cutting through the noise of clattering silverware and loud morning conversations. The diner was packed to the brim. It was shift change hour. The booths and counter stools were filled with exhausted men and women coming off the night shift and fresh-faced workers gearing up for the morning rush. I looked around the room. Everywhere I looked, I saw the royal blue and silver uniforms of the Sapphire Hotel Group. Housekeepers, maintenance workers, valet attendants, and kitchen staff. My people. The moment I stepped fully into the harsh fluorescent light of the diner, the noise in the room began to die down. The clattering of plates stopped. One by one, heads turned toward the front door. They recognized me instantly. I was not a CEO who hid in a glass tower. I knew my staff. I knew their faces. But they had never seen me like this, covered in dirt, smelling of ozone and smoke, looking like I had just crawled out of a war zone. A massive, broad-shouldered man sitting at the front counter slowly stood up. It was Marcus, the head of regional maintenance for my downtown properties. He wiped his greasy hands on his denim work pants, his eyes wide with shock. Emma's Vivian Marcus, said his deep voice carrying across the completely silent diner. What in the world happened to you? Are you hurt? I did not ask for a chair. I did not ask for a glass of water. I did not ask for their pity. I walked straight into the center of the diner, standing tall under the flickering lights. I need your attention right now. I projected my voice, commanding the room with absolute authority. For 30 years, I have run the Sapphire Hotel Group as a family. I did not build this company with Wall Street money. I built it with your sweat, your long hours, and your dedication to excellence. The entire room was captivated, hanging on my every word. Last night, my own daughter and her husband forged medical documents to declare me legally insane. I continued the raw truth hitting the room like a shockwave. They froze my bank accounts. They locked me out of the corporate network. And they trapped my grandson and me inside a dying server room, expecting us to suffocate. They are currently occupying the flagship tower with heavily armed mercenaries from a Miami money laundering syndicate. Angry murmurs and gasps erupted from the booths. Marcus took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. At 8 o'clock tonight, I projected over the rising noise. Terrence intends to sign the physical deed of the flagship property directly over to that cartel to cover his own personal gambling debts. If that wire transfer clears, the syndicate will instantly liquidate the real estate. They will tear down the hotel to build a casino. Every single one of you will be fired without severance. Your pensions will be wiped out. Your health insurance will vanish overnight. The legacy we built together will be sold for scrap to pay off a coward's debt. I locked eyes with the people I had spent decades protecting. I looked at a woman sitting in the second booth clutching a coffee mug. "Sarah," I said directly to her. 20 years ago, when the banks refused to give you a loan, I paid out of my own pocket for your daughter's experimental leukemia treatments. She just graduated from Spelman College last month. Sarah stood up, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am, you did." I turned to my left, locking eyes with a tough-looking young man wearing a valet uniform. "Jamal, 5 years ago, when the system tried to swallow you whole over a false possession charge, I paid the best defense attorney in Atlanta to clear your name, and I gave you a job when nobody else would even look at your resume." Jamal stood up immediately, his posture rigid with respect. "You saved my life, Ms. Vivian." I looked back at Marcus standing by the counter. Marcus, when the recession hit in 2008, and every other hotel chain in this city slashed their maintenance departments by half, I took a massive pay cut to ensure not a single one of my workers missed a mortgage payment. Marcus nodded, his jaw set tight. "We never forgot that. None of us did." I swept my gaze across the entire crowded diner, making sure every single person in that room felt the weight of my words. "Today, a violent criminal syndicate is trying to steal the roof over your heads," I declared, my voice ringing with undeniable power. "They think because they froze my bank accounts and took my phone that I am completely powerless. They think an empire is just a piece of paper signed in a boardroom. They do not understand that my empire is sitting right here in this room." I took a deep breath, the fire in my chest burning brighter than ever. "I am going to take my building back tonight. I am going to destroy the men who threatened my grandson, and I am going to rip my company out of their greedy hands. But I cannot do it alone. I need an army. Who stands with me?" For one brief second, there was absolute silence. Then Marcus reached into his heavy work boots and pulled out a thick wad of cash. He slammed it down on the Formica counter. "I stand with you, Miss Vivian," Marcus roared. Sarah marched forward, pulling a ring of keys from her apron. "Whatever you need, it is yours." Jamal practically leaped over his booth, pulling out his cell phone. "Point the target, Miss Vivian. We are ready." The entire diner erupted. Dozens of loyal, street-smart, hard-working men and women surged forward. There was no hesitation. There was no fear of the cartel. There was only absolute fierce loyalty to the matriarch who had never abandoned them. The energy in the room shifted instantly from shock to militant mobilization. We were no longer two hunted fugitives running through the dark. We had just become a highly motivated army. Within 10 minutes, the diner was transformed into a tactical command center. The owner flipped the sign on the front door to closed and locked the deadbolt. Employees emptied their pockets, throwing whatever cash they had onto the front counter. It was not millions of dollars, but it was enough to buy exactly what we needed to start the war. Jamal ran out the back door and returned 5 minutes later with 3 untraceable burner phones purchased from a corner bodega down the street. He handed one directly to me and one to Isaiah. Marcus pulled a large, rolled-up blueprint from his maintenance truck and spread it across the largest dining table. "We have a major logistical advantage," he explained, tapping the paper with a thick, grease-stained finger. "Terrence locked down the executive elevators and the main loading docks, but he does not know about the secondary service fleet. We have 6 unmarked commercial laundry vans parked at an off-site storage facility in Decatur. The cartel scouts will not recognize them because they do not have the Sapphire logo on the side. We can use them as Trojan horses to transport people and equipment right past their perimeter surveillance." "Perfect," I said, my mind calculating the offensive strategy with ruthless efficiency. We need a secure location to run a cyber warfare operation immediately. Isaiah needs to get back online to track the syndicate's digital movements before the closing dinner tonight. Sarah stepped forward, handing Isaiah a set of heavy brass keys. My brother owns a commercial auto body shop 2 blocks from here. It is closed on Tuesdays. It has high-speed industrial internet and cinder block walls. You can set up your command center in the back office. No one will find you there. Isaiah took the keys, his confidence fully restored by the massive show of force surrounding us. He looked at me, a fierce, determined smile spreading across his face. I can run the counter-hack from that garage, Grandma. I just need to get back onto Terrence's private network. I looked around the room at the faces of my employees. They were ready to risk their lives and their freedom to protect the legacy we had built together. Terrence and Denise thought they could defeat me by stripping away my corporate titles and freezing my assets. They fundamentally misunderstood the rules of the game. You can steal a woman's money, but you cannot steal her respect. Listen closely, everyone, I said, my voice dropping to a serious tactical level. We have exactly 13 hours to orchestrate a complete hostile takeover of our own building. Terrence is hosting a private closing dinner in the penthouse at 8 o'clock tonight. That is when he plans to hand the physical deed over to the Miami syndicate bosses. We are going to make sure that transaction never happens. Marcus cracked his knuckles, a dangerous glint in his eye. Just give the word, Miss Vivian. How do we breach the tower? We do not breach it by force, I replied, a cold, calculated strategy forming perfectly in my mind. The syndicate is heavily armed and expecting a frontal assault. We are going to walk right through the front door using their own arrogance against them. We are going to hit them from the inside out. I picked up the burner phone from the counter and slipped it into my pocket. The fear and exhaustion from the night before were completely gone. I was no longer a hunted victim. I was the architect of their destruction. Let us get to work, I commanded. We are going to war. The room moved into action with swift, coordinated precision. The laundry vans were dispatched. The safe house was secured. We had 14 hours left on the clock, and we were coming for blood. The auto body shop smelled strongly of motor oil and oxidized metal. Sarah's brother had cleared out the back manager office, leaving us a windowless bunker lined with solid cinder block walls. It was the absolute perfect fortress for what we needed to do. Isaiah wasted zero time. He shoved a stack of greasy paper invoices off a heavy metal desk and threw his battered laptop down. Marcus dragged in a thick industrial extension cord, powering up the 3 extra monitors we had hastily scavenged from the diner's back office. We had exactly 13 hours and 10 minutes left until Terrence signed my flagship hotel over to a violent cartel. I stood right behind my grandson, watching the monitors flare to life. The harsh blue light illuminated the sweat still drying on his dark forehead. We need the exact routing numbers for Terrence's offshore shell company, I told him, pacing the cramped concrete room. We also need irrefutable digital proof connecting him directly to the Miami syndicate. If we walk into that penthouse blind tonight, they will shoot us before we can even speak a single word. We need leverage. Isaiah typed with a ferocious, blinding speed. He linked the 3 burner phones to his laptop, creating an improvised, localized cellular network to completely mask our physical location. I am running a backdoor protocol through the hospital server, he said, his eyes darting across fast lines of scrolling green code. Dad used their private network to file the forged psychiatric hold this morning. If he left a digital bridge open between his laptop and the medical server, I can exploit it to tunnel straight into his personal financial files. But he has active military countermeasures running, Grandma. If I trigger a security alert, he will sever the connection instantly, and we will be permanently locked out of his system. I placed my hands firmly on his shoulders. Then do not trigger an alert. Be a ghost, Isaiah. Be smarter than the man who thinks he owns us. The sudden shrill ringing of the burner phone in my pocket shattered the tense silence of the garage. We both froze instantly. Isaiah's fingers stopped hovering over the keyboard. Nobody had this new number except the loyal employees currently mobilizing across the city, but the screen did not display a known contact. It flashed a blocked caller ID. Is it Marcus? I asked, staring down at the glowing digital screen. Isaiah shook his head, running a quick trace program on his laptop. No, it is a masked cellular signal bouncing off a local tower near Buckhead. It is Mom. My blood ran ice cold. Denise had realized we were gone. She had realized her perfect clinical execution had completely failed. I looked at Isaiah, instantly shifting into a ruthless combat mode. Can you use this active call to bypass the two-factor authentication on Terrence's network? Can you trace her connection back to his laptop while I keep her talking on the line? Isaiah's eyes widened with sudden understanding. Yes, if you keep her on the line for at least 5 solid minutes, I can piggyback on her cellular data packet and slide right past Dad's firewall. But Grandma, you have to keep her incredibly angry. If she gets suspicious and hangs up, I lose the digital bridge completely. I nodded once, a fierce, ruthless determination settling heavily over me. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello, Denise," I said, my voice radiating a deadly absolute calm. "Where are you, Mom?" Denise shrieked through the tiny speaker. Her voice was pure, frantic hysteria. The polished, sophisticated facade she usually wore was completely gone. "Where did you go?" The orderlies found the server room door blown wide open. "Terrence is losing his damn mind. He has armed men tearing apart the entire downtown district looking for you right now. You tell your cowardly husband." "He can stop looking," I replied, leaning comfortably against the cold cinderblock wall. "Because I am coming straight for him tonight." "You listen to me, you stubborn old fool!" Denise screamed, her panic rapidly turning into a vicious, toxic rage. "You think you are so incredibly smart escaping that room. You think you can just walk away and plot some grand, dramatic revenge. You have absolutely no money. You have no legal rights. You are a diagnosed psychiatric patient running around Atlanta with a stolen laptop. If you step foot near a police station, they will lock you in a padded cell before you can even speak a single word. I am not going to the police, Denise. I do not need the police to dismantle you." Denise let out a dark, terrifying laugh. The horrible sound sent a shiver down my spine. It was a laugh devoid of any maternal warmth or basic humanity. "You really want to play hardball, Mom. You really want to test me today. I know you think you are fighting for your precious legacy, but if you do not walk into the lobby of the Sapphire Hotel and surrender to my security team in the next 30 minutes, I am going to make you regret surviving last night." "And how exactly are you going to do that?" I asked, maintaining my icy composure. "You have already stolen my bank accounts. You have already tried to murder my grandson. You have absolutely no leverage left over me." "Oh, I have plenty of leverage," Denise hissed, the venom dripping from every single syllable. "I am standing in the Westview Cemetery right now, Mom. I am standing directly over my father's grave." My breath caught sharply in my throat. Calvin, my husband, the man who had broken his back lifting heavy cargo boxes to build our very first dollar. The man who had loved Denise with a blind, unconditional devotion until the day his heart finally gave out. "What are you doing at your father's grave, Denise?" I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal pitch. "I hired a private demolition crew," Denise stated coldly. "They are waiting for my signal right now. If you do not surrender the golden share certificate to Terrence by noon, I am going to have them completely bulldoze Calvin's monument. I am going to have them dig up his casket and dump his remains into an unmarked county landfill. I will completely erase his physical memory from this earth, and I will leave you with absolutely nothing to visit." The sheer, unmatched cruelty of her threat hit me like a physical punch to the chest. My own daughter, the child Calvin had carried on his strong shoulders. She was threatening to desecrate his sacred resting place just to secure a payout from a violent cartel. It was a level of depravity I did not think she was truly capable of. I looked over at Isaiah. He was staring at me in pure, absolute horror, having heard his mother's threat through the phone speaker. He raised 3 fingers. 3 more minutes. I needed to keep her talking for 3 more minutes to secure the hack. I closed my eyes, summoning every ounce of strength I had cultivated over a lifetime of fighting ruthless enemies. I buried my immense pain. I weaponized my raw fury. "You think threatening a piece of granite is going to break me, Denise?" I asked, letting out a slow, mocking laugh. "You really are a pathetic, desperate amateur. You are standing over your father's grave trying to blackmail the woman who gave you life, all because you married a weak, miserable failure of a man." "Shut up," Denise screamed loudly. "Terrence is going to save us. He is handling the syndicate." "Terrence cannot even handle his own bank account." I fired back, launching a relentless psychological assault to keep her completely unhinged. "You think I do not know why you are so desperate, Denise. You think I do not know that you are terrified of losing the country club memberships and the luxury cars. But Terrence is not a savior. He is a parasite, and the saddest part is that you already know it. You know he is a total fraud." "I told you to shut up!" she yelled, her breathing growing heavy and ragged over the phone. "I am not going to shut up." I pushed harder, driving the knife directly into her deepest personal insecurities. I watched you pretend to be a successful corporate wife for 10 miserable years. But we both know the real truth. Terrence never loved you, Denise. He loved my money. He loved the elite access my name gave him. Do you really think he is going to protect you when the cartel comes collecting? He will throw you directly in front of the bullets to save his own miserable skin. He loves me, Denise sobbed, her voice cracking under the intense emotional pressure. He is doing this for our family. I was sleeping with his executive assistant for 3 entire years, I stated brutally, delivering a toxic secret I had kept hidden to protect her fragile feelings. Her name was Chloe. I paid her a $400,000 cash severance package in 2019 to quietly leave the state so you would not have to face the public humiliation of a messy divorce. Your entire marriage is a perfectly funded illusion. You are risking federal prison and your own son's life for a man who treats you like an inconvenient accessory. A loud, shattered scream echoed through the phone. Denise lost total, absolute control. She was cursing and smashing things, hurling vicious insults at me, her composure completely destroyed by the sudden, devastating revelation of her husband's long-standing infidelity. I kept pushing, challenging her intelligence, mocking her poor life choices, and reminding her of every single time she had failed to measure up to the high standards I had set. I kept her absolutely blinded by her own furious, toxic rage. I watched Isaiah out of the corner of my eye. His hands flew across the mechanical keyboard, decoding the encrypted firewall algorithms. The progress bar on his center monitor crept upward, agonizingly slow. 80%, 90%, 95%. "You are nothing without me, Mom," Denise shrieked hysterically. "You are just a bitter old woman who cares more about a hotel than her own daughter. I am going to tear down Dad's grave, and then I am going to watch the cartel put a bullet right in your head." Isaiah slammed the enter key with a resounding crack. A massive green box flashed across his 3 monitors. He looked up at me, a fierce, triumphant grin spreading across his exhausted face. He gave me a sharp, enthusiastic thumbs up. We were officially in. He had successfully breached Terrence's private secure network. I took a deep breath, my tactical mission completely accomplished. "You go ahead and touch your father's grave, Denise," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying deadpan whisper. "You go ahead and dig up the only man who ever truly loved you unconditionally. Because by the time I am finished with you tonight, you are going to wish you were the one buried deeply in that dirt." I ended the call and tossed the burner phone onto the heavy metal desk. The psychological warfare was officially over. The digital gates were wide open. I looked at my brilliant grandson, who was already diving deep into Terrence's highly classified financial ledgers. We had exactly 12 hours left to execute the final devastating blow, and I was completely ready to bring the entire empire crashing down on their heads. I stared at the glowing monitors illuminating the cramped auto body shop. The digital ledgers reflecting my daughter's absolute betrayal burned into my retinas. Denise was not a victim trapped in a desperate marriage. She was a willing architect in a global money laundering syndicate. I pulled the burner phone from my pocket. My hands were perfectly steady. I did not dial the local Atlanta Police Department. Terrence had already proved he owned them when he bribed the precinct judge to sign that fraudulent psychiatric hold yesterday morning. Local authorities would simply see a confused runaway grandmother making wild accusations against her successful son-in-law. I needed a weapon far more devastating than a local patrol car. I needed the federal government. I punched in a sequence of 11 numbers I had memorized over 2 decades ago. The line rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered on a secure federal channel. "Marshal Hayes speaking." I did not bother with pleasantries. "Marshal, it is Beatrice. I need a major favor, and I need it right this absolute second." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Ms. Vivian." The United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia sounded like a disciplined soldier standing at attention. "It has been 5 years since you last called me. Are you safe?" "I am safe for the next 10 hours, I replied, pacing the concrete floor of the garage. "But my family is attempting to sell the Sapphire Hotel Group to a Miami-based criminal cartel tonight at 8 o'clock. They are using forged medical conservatorship documents to bypass the board of directors." Marshall let out a low whistle. "A cartel. Ms. Vivian, you need to tell me exactly where you are right now. I am sending a heavily armed federal tactical team to extract you immediately." "I am not hiding, Marshal," I stated, my voice cutting through his protocol. "I am going on the offensive, and I am going to deliver you the biggest financial crime bust of your entire federal career. Listen to me carefully," I continued. 20 years ago, when you were a broke law student at Howard University, facing eviction, because your father got laid off from the steel plant, I secretly funded the minority scholarship that paid your tuition in full. I did not do it because I wanted praise. I did it because I recognized a brilliant, ruthless legal mind that just needed a fair chance to destroy a corrupt system. You promised me that if I ever needed a favor, you would balance the scales. I am calling in that marker right now. Marshall did not hesitate for a single second. Name the target, Ms. Vivian. I have the entire Department of Justice at my disposal. My son-in-law Terrence and my daughter Denise. I said the words tasting like ash in my mouth, but I forced them out with lethal precision. They have been quietly embezzling funds into Cayman Island shell companies for 2 years. Tonight they are executing a hostile takeover of my flagship hotel to secure a 20% equity stake in an international money laundering syndicate. This is not just a localized corporate fraud dispute, Marshall. This is a massive textbook violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. I have the digital ledgers to prove it. Isaiah turned from his laptop, nodding sharply to confirm he had secured the downloaded data packets. I just need you to mobilize your financial crimes division, I instructed. Marshall was typing furiously on his end. I am dispatching a federal SWAT team to the Sapphire Tower right now, he declared. We will raid the executive floors, kick down the doors, and arrest Terrence and Denise before they can even finalize the property transfer. I will have them in federal custody within 30 minutes. No, I shouted, my voice echoing off the cinder block walls. You will do absolutely no such thing. You cannot raid that building right now. Marshall paused, his confusion evident. Ms. Vivian, if we have the evidence, we need to strike immediately before they destroy the hard drives. They have armed syndicate enforcers occupying the lobby. It is a highly volatile hostage situation. I walked over to the desk, leaning my weight against the cold metal edge. Marshall, you are thinking like a cop. I need you to think like a prosecutor. If you send SWAT teams crashing through the front doors right now, Terrence and Denise will instantly trigger a remote wipe protocol on their servers. The cartel bosses will shoot their way out of the building and claim they were just there for a legitimate real estate dinner. You might arrest my daughter for forging a medical document, but you will never secure the RECO conviction. They will hire high-priced defense attorneys, tie you up in litigation for 10 years, and ultimately walk free on a technicality. Marshall let out a frustrated sigh. Then what is your tactical play here? How do we secure an ironclad federal conviction without raiding the premises immediately? I smiled, a cold, ruthless smile that did not reach my eyes. You need them to push the button, Marshall. You need Terrence and Denise to voluntarily execute the multi-million-dollar wire transfer with the Miami syndicate bosses sitting right there in the same room. You need the digital ink to dry on the contract while the money crosses international borders. That is the absolute only way to trigger an automatic federal felony that no defense attorney can ever dismiss. If you give me 12 hours, I will deliver them to you on a silver platter. Marshall was silent for a long, tense moment, weighing the immense risk of allowing a civilian to orchestrate a federal sting operation. You are talking about walking into a room full of heavily armed, violent cartel leaders, he warned, his voice thick with genuine concern. If they realize you are setting a trap, they will not hesitate to execute you on the spot. I cannot authorize a civilian to knowingly enter a lethal combat zone. I am not a civilian, Marshall, I replied, my tone radiating absolute, unwavering authority. I am the chief executive officer of the Sapphire Hotel Group, and I'm going to walk into my own penthouse tonight to terminate a bad contract. I need you to have your tactical team stationed silently on the adjacent rooftops and holding in the service elevators. Do not engage the perimeter guards. Do not flash a single siren. You wait for my exact signal. When the money hits the digital escrow account, we spring the trap and we take them all down simultaneously. I heard the sharp click of Marshall closing his laptop. You have my word, Miss Vivian. My tactical teams will be invisible until the trap is sprung. May God have mercy on whoever is standing in your way tonight. I ended the call and tossed the burner phone onto the desk. The federal snare was officially set. I turned to Isaiah, who was staring at me with a mixture of absolute awe and lingering terror. Get your laptop packed up, I commanded, rolling my sleeves down and adjusting my ruined jacket. We are heading back to the diner. We need to brief the assault team. We left the auto body shop and marched quickly back through the humid Atlanta streets toward Mama's kitchen. The morning sun was blazing now, cutting through the smog of the city. When we pushed through the diner doors, the atmosphere was electric. Marcus, Sarah, Jamal, and 30 other loyal employees were huddled around the main counter, examining the crude architectural blueprints of the Sapphire Tower. They looked up as I entered the room, parting respectfully to let me approach the center table. "The federal government is officially standing by," I announced, planting my hands firmly on the counter, "but they cannot move until the syndicate physically executes the wire transfer inside the penthouse. That means Isaiah and I have to infiltrate the top floor of the tower tonight and orchestrate the transaction face to face." The diner went dead silent. Marcus crossed his massive arms, his brow furrowed in deep concern. "Ms. Vivian, the penthouse level is completely isolated. The main elevators require a biometric executive keycard, and the cartel has 4 armed guards stationed at the only access point on the 39th floor. You cannot just walk up there." I looked at Marcus, a fierce, determined fire burning in my chest. "I am not going to walk up there, Marcus. I am going to be delivered right to their front door." I pulled out a pen and tapped a specific location on the blueprint. "Terrence is hosting a private catered closing dinner for the cartel bosses tonight at 8 o'clock. He ordered the food from an external luxury catering service because he fired our internal culinary staff yesterday afternoon to save money." Jamal stepped forward, his eyes lighting up with sudden tactical understanding. "You want us to intercept the catering delivery?" he asked, a sly grin spreading across his face. I nodded, matching his ruthless energy. "We are not just going to intercept the delivery, Jamal. We are going to become the delivery. We have 6 unmarked commercial laundry vans and uniform access. We are going to hijack the catering trucks, strip the drivers, and wear their uniforms. We are going to pack the hot food carts with our own specialized equipment. And we are going to roll right past the cartel security checkpoint, disguised as invisible working-class servants. Terrence thinks he is untouchable because he hired men with guns, but he forgot the golden rule of the hospitality industry. Nobody ever pays attention to the people serving the food. They look right past us like we are completely invisible. We will use their own classist arrogance to destroy them from the inside out. We spend the rest of the day staging the vans and acquiring the catering uniforms. At exactly 7 o'clock tonight, we roll on the Sapphire Tower. It is time to serve my daughter her final meal." The heavy tires of the unmarked commercial laundry van rumbled over the wet asphalt. I sat perfectly still in the back, surrounded by the metallic hum of the engine and the tense breathing of my loyal employees. Jamal was at the wheel wearing a crisp white chef's coat we had taken from the hijacked catering truck. Beside him sat Sarah, dressed as a high-end server, her hands gripping a clipboard holding the forged invoices Isaiah had generated. I was seated on a narrow metal bench, my flawless white power suit covered by a thick moving blanket to protect it from the grease of the cargo hold. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the rhythmic vibrations of the vehicle ground me. I thought about the first time I walked into a bank to secure a commercial loan. I was 28 years old, wearing a thrift store suit, holding a binder full of handwritten business projections. The loan officer had laughed in my face, telling me that black women belonged in the housekeeping department, not the executive suite. I did not yell that day. I simply walked out, saved every penny I earned scrubbing those very floors, and bought my first property in cash 5 years later. I use that same relentless patience now. Terrence and Denise thought they had completely broken me by freezing my accounts and stealing my titles. They failed to realize that true power does not reside in a corporate bank account. It resides in the unwavering fortitude of a woman who refuses to be erased. We felt the van slow down and lurch as it approached the underground loading dock of the Sapphire Tower. My heart hammered a steady military march against my ribs. We were walking right back into the lion's den. Through the thin metal partition, I heard a heavy knock on the driver's side window. The cartel perimeter guards had intercepted us. "State your business," a rough voice demanded through the glass. The accent was thick, undeniably Miami. Jamal did not miss a single beat. His tone was perfectly bored, completely embodying the exhausted working-class catering driver. "Premium Events Catering," he said, handing the forged clipboard through the window. "We are scheduled for the private penthouse closing dinner. Your boss ordered the imported Wagyu beef, and it is getting cold." There was a tense, agonizing pause. I held my breath under the blanket, listening to the guard tap his radio. "Yeah, we have the food guys here," the guard muttered. "Check them." The radio crackled back. The heavy rear doors of the van suddenly swung open. The harsh fluorescent lights of the loading dock flooded the dark cargo space. I ducked down instantly as Marcus threw a massive canvas linen cart directly over me, completely obscuring my body from view. I crouched inside the heavy canvas, breathing in the smell of industrial bleach and starch. A bright flashlight beam swept across the interior of the van. The cartel guard poked the side of the linen cart with the barrel of his rifle. "What is with all the extra carts?" the guard barked. Sarah stepped smoothly into his line of sight, blocking the cart with her body. "The penthouse dining room requires full floor-to-ceiling drapery changes for executive events," she stated firmly. "If you want to delay the service and explain to your boss why he is eating on bare tables, that is your choice, but I am not taking the pay cut." The guard scoffed, clearly unimpressed by the logistics of high-end hospitality. "Fine, get moving." He slammed the rear door shut, plunging me back into darkness. The van lurched forward, rolling smoothly into the loading bay. We had breached the first layer of defense. I felt the cart shift as Marcus and Isaiah grabbed the heavy metal handles and rolled me out onto the concrete floor. The vibrations of the wheels echoed loudly as they pushed me toward the service elevators. "We are clear," Isaiah whispered, tapping the side of the canvas cart. "We are heading up." The service elevator doors dinged open and we rolled inside. As the elevator ascended toward the 40th floor, I sat in the darkness going over every single tactical variable in my mind. I was about to face 3 violent syndicate leaders completely unarmed. I was about to confront the daughter who had tried to drug me into oblivion and the son-in-law who had held a gun to my grandson's chest. I could not afford a single ounce of hesitation. I had to be colder and sharper than the killers sitting in my boardroom. The elevator jolted to a halt. The doors slid open, revealing the staging kitchen just behind the main penthouse dining room. Marcus rolled my cart into a secluded corner by the walk-in freezers and pulled back the heavy canvas cover. The cold stainless steel surfaces of the industrial prep stations gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lighting. The air smelled of expensive roasting meats and rich complex sauces. It was a smell I knew intimately from decades of hosting extravagant galas for politicians and celebrities. But tonight, there was no joy in this space. There was only the cold, metallic taste of impending warfare. I stood up, stepping out of the cart and brushing the wrinkles from my crisp white suit. I checked my reflection in the polished stainless steel door of the freezer. My hair was perfect. My posture was rigid. I looked exactly like the chief executive officer who owned this building. Isaiah handed me a small wireless earpiece. "Put this in, Grandma," he instructed softly. "I have hacked the internal security feeds. I will be monitoring the penthouse cameras from the prep station. If things go wrong, I can remotely lock the doors to buy you time." I placed the small device into my ear. "You just be ready to trigger the lockdown when I give the signal," I told him. "Do not worry about me. I have handled dangerous men my entire life." I walked quietly toward the swinging wooden doors that separated the staging kitchen from the main penthouse dining room. I pushed the door open just a tiny fraction, allowing a sliver of light to pass through. I peered into the lavish executive suite. The room was breathtaking with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. In the center of the room sat a massive, solid mahogany dining table. Seated at the head of the table was Terrence wearing a brand-new custom suit, projecting the arrogant confidence of a man who thought he had finally won. Next to him sat Denise, sipping from a crystal glass filled with my $1,000 vintage wine. Sitting opposite them were 3 men who looked completely out of place in a luxury hotel. They wore expensive clothes, but they carried themselves with brutal, lethal tension. These were the Miami syndicate bosses, the men who had threatened to execute my entire family over a bad debt. The lead boss, a man with cold, dead eyes and a thick scar running down his neck, was tapping a heavy gold pen against the polished wood of the table. Lying dead center on the table between them was the physical property deed. The exact deed I had signed under extreme duress in the office transferring ownership of the $40 million flagship hotel to Terrence's shell company. "We appreciate your patience, gentlemen," Terrence said, his voice dripping with sycophantic desperation. "The corporate transfer takes a moment to clear the federal registry, but the deed is fully signed and authenticated. As soon as you authorize the $25 million wire transfer to my holding account, the building is officially yours to develop." Denise leaned forward, flashing a charming artificial smile. "We are very excited about this partnership. With our local political connections and your financial backing, we can turn this property into the most profitable casino hub in the entire Southeast. We will ensure the local zoning boards look the other way while you establish your operations." The lead syndicate boss did not return her smile. He just stared at the signed deed, evaluating the transaction. "I do not care about your political connections," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I care that this building gives me a clean, legitimate front for my import business. You promised me full, unregulated access to the loading docks and the freight tunnels. If I find out you lied about the security infrastructure, I am going to bury you both in the foundation." Terrence swallowed hard, a flash of genuine fear breaking through his arrogant facade. "You have my absolute word. My mother-in-law built this place like a fortress, but she is permanently out of the picture. We have complete unchecked authority." I pushed the heavy wooden doors wide open. They crashed against the walls with a resounding crack that shattered the tense atmosphere of the penthouse. "Actually, Terrence," I announced, my voice slicing through the room like a perfectly sharpened blade, "my authority is extremely unchecked." I walked slowly into the center of the room, the heels of my pristine white shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I did not look at my daughter. I did not look at my treacherous son-in-law. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the 3 violent cartel bosses sitting at my table. The sheer shock in the room was palpable. Terrence leaped out of his chair, knocking his wineglass over. The dark red liquid spilled across the mahogany, staining the table like fresh blood. Denise let out a short, terrified shriek, dropping her crystal glass entirely. It shattered against the floor, joining the absolute chaos. Mom, Denise gasped, her face draining of all color. "How did you get in here?" "You are supposed to be locked in the server room." The 3 syndicate bosses did not ask questions. They reacted with the lethal instinct of cornered predators. In flawless unison, they stood up, shoving their chairs back and reaching inside their tailored jackets. 3 heavy black handguns were drawn instantly and pointed directly at my chest. The red laser sights from their weapons danced across the pristine white fabric of my jacket, settling ominously over my racing heart. I could feel the intense, radiating heat of their focused aggression. I knew these men had killed before. I knew they would not hesitate to kill again if they felt threatened. But I also knew that greedy men are fundamentally predictable. They value money and survival above all else. Terrence backed away, his hands raised in panic. "Shoot her!" he screamed at the cartel bosses, his voice cracking with pure cowardly desperation. "She is trying to ruin the deal. She is a crazy old woman. Just shoot her right now." I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands in surrender. I simply stood at the head of my table, radiating a terrifying, unyielding calm. I looked down the barrels of 3 loaded guns without blinking a single eye. "Gentlemen," I said, my tone perfectly conversational, but laced with absolute poison. "If you pull those triggers right now, you will never leave this room alive." The lead syndicate boss narrowed his scarred eyes, keeping his weapon leveled at my heart. "You think we are afraid of hotel security, lady. My men control this entire building. You control the lobby," I corrected him, offering a cold, condescending smile. "But I control the architecture. The moment a gunshot echoes in this penthouse, the acoustic sensors will trigger the primary biometric lockdown protocol. 4-inch-thick titanium plates will instantly drop over the elevators, the stairwells, and the floor-to-ceiling windows. The ventilation system will seal shut and pump halon gas into the room to extinguish any perceived fire. You will all suffocate in less than 4 minutes." I watched the lead boss hesitate, his finger pausing on the trigger. He realized I was not bluffing. The balance of power had shifted completely. I took one slow, deliberate step closer to the table, ignoring the red laser dots resting over my heart. I raised my hand in a gesture of absolute command. "So, put the guns away." I ordered, my voice echoing with the full weight of a woman who had built an empire from the dirt up. "We need to talk serious business." I pulled out the heavy mahogany chair directly opposite the lead syndicate boss and sat down. I smoothed the lapels of my white suit. I did not cast a single glance toward my daughter or my son-in-law. As far as I was concerned, they were already ghosts. They were nothing more than collateral damage in a negotiation. They lacked the intellect to survive. The lead boss slowly lowered his weapon, but kept it resting on his thigh. His scarred neck twitched. He studied me with eyes like black ice. I was a man who commanded a massive criminal enterprise in Miami. He was used to people begging, trembling, or dying in his presence. I was certainly not used to a 68-year-old black woman crashing his private dinner and dictating the terms of engagement. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain why I should not shoot you and your entire family," he growled. I folded my hands on the polished wood. "I am not here to save them," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I am here to save you $25 million. I let that number hang in the air. The boss leaned forward slightly, his interest reluctantly captured. I kept my gaze locked entirely on him. You are about to wire $25 million into a shell company controlled by Terrence in exchange for the deed to this flagship property. You want this hotel because it sits on a prime downtown intersection, offering you a massive, completely legitimate front for your international money laundering operations. You want to use my loading docks, my freight tunnels, and my corporate accounts to clean your dirty money. Terrence gasped, grabbing the edge of the table. "Shut up, Vivian," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Do not listen to her. She is a certified psychiatric patient." I ignored him completely, keeping my eyes fixed on the syndicate leader. "Terrence sold you a very pretty dream." I continued, my tone calm and conversational. "But did Terrence happen to mention the structural liens on this specific building? Did he mention that the City Planning Commission is currently investigating the sub-basement levels for massive code violations?" The boss shifted his gaze toward Terrence. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "What structural liens?" he demanded. Terrence began to sweat profusely. He tugged at his expensive silk tie, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "There are no liens," he stammered, wiping his forehead. "The deed is perfectly clean. I had our lawyers check the Federal Registry this morning. The property is completely unencumbered." He checked the registry for financial liens, I corrected, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the mahogany table. "But he clearly did not check the environmental database. Did your brilliant business partner tell you that the Environmental Protection Agency is auditing this exact property tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock? The three cartel bosses froze. Environmental audits meant federal agents. Federal agents meant drug-sniffing dogs, structural inspections, and a massive, heavily armed government presence right in the middle of their new money-laundering hub. "You are buying a toxic trap," I told the Miami boss, letting a mocking smile touch my lips. "The foundational concrete poured in 1992 is laced with highly toxic industrial asbestos. The EPA sent a formal notification to my corporate office 3 days ago. If you take ownership of this deed tonight, you inherit the federal audit tomorrow. The government will instantly freeze the property, seal the loading docks, and bring in hazmat teams. They will tear the walls open. Whatever illegal cargo you plan to move through my freight tunnels will be seized by federal authorities before lunchtime." "You are lying!" Denise shrieked, leaping up from her chair. Her face was contorted with a vicious, desperate panic. "She is making all of this up to stop the transfer. We ran a full inspection on this building. There is absolutely no asbestos." I calmly reached into the inside pocket of my pristine white blazer. The cartel men immediately tensed their hands, moving back toward their weapons. I raised my hands slowly, showing them I was unarmed. I pulled out a thick, folded stack of official-looking documents. They bore the crisp blue seal of the Environmental Protection Agency. My grandson Isaiah had forged them flawlessly in the back room of the auto body shop just 3 hours ago. I tossed the heavy stack of papers right into the center of the table. They landed with a solid, undeniable thud right next to Terrence's signed deed. "Read them yourself," I challenged the syndicate leader. "The mandated quarantine order, the federal inspection schedule, the projected cost of the mandatory asbestos abatement. It will cost you $12 million just to make the building legally operational again, and that does not even factor in the massive federal scrutiny. You are about to wire $25 million for the absolute privilege of hosting a federal raid." The lead boss picked up the documents. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the incredibly detailed architectural diagrams and the forged federal signatures. His jaw tightened. The silence in the penthouse was thick and suffocating. I could hear Terrence gasping for air, his chest heaving under his tailored suit. Terrence slammed his hands on the table. "They are fake!" he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She printed those out to scare you. I promise you the building is clean. The transfer is perfectly safe." The boss slowly lowered the papers. He looked at Terrence with a gaze so filled with dark, lethal promise that the younger man visibly recoiled. "I am running an international import syndicate, Hayes," the boss said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, gravelly whisper. "I move hundreds of millions of dollars across borders. Do you really think I'm going to risk my entire operational network on your promise? I asked you point blank if this building had any federal oversight. You looked me in the eye and swore it was a ghost property. It is a ghost property," Terrence pleaded, tears actually welling up in his eyes. "She is a crazy old woman trying to destroy my deal because she hates me. Please, you have to believe me. The deed is right there. The portal is open. Just hit the wire transfer and the hotel is yours." The boss picked up the signed property deed. He held it in one hand and the forged EPA documents in the other. I could see the precise moment the trust completely evaporated. A criminal enterprise relies on absolute certainty. I had just injected a massive lethal dose of doubt into the room. I am not paying $25 million to buy a federal audit, the boss stated coldly, tossing the deed back onto the table. The deal is dead. No, Denise screamed, the sound tearing through the penthouse like glass shattering. Her perfectly styled hair was coming undone. Her expensive makeup looked harsh and unnatural under the chandelier lights. You cannot walk away. You promised us the partnership. You promised us the equity stake. The boss ignored her entirely, keeping his cold eyes locked on Terrence. You owe me a massive debt, Hayes. You wasted my time and you tried to sell me a poisoned asset. My men are going to take you down to the basement. We are going to have a very long, very painful conversation about how you are going to repay me. Terrence collapsed back into his chair, sobbing openly. He covered his face with his hands completely broken. He had tried to play in the major leagues, and he had been instantly crushed. I sat at the head of the table watching them fall apart. I did not feel a single drop of pity. Denise spun toward me, her entire body shaking with a violent, uncontrollable rage. She grabbed her crystal wine glass and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the floor-to-ceiling window, raining sharp shards across the carpet. She planted her hands on the mahogany table, leaning over it like a rabid animal. "Shut up," she screamed at me, the veins bulging in her neck. "Shut up, shut up, shut up. You are just mad because I finally beat you. You are just angry because I proved I am smarter than you." I looked at her with a calm, deadpan expression. "You are not smarter than me, Denise. You are just louder." Her face contorted into a mask of pure demonic fury. She completely lost her mind. The psychological pressure of the impending cartel execution and my relentless calm pushed her over the absolute edge of sanity. She stopped caring about who was in the room. She stopped caring about the consequences. "You think you are so brilliant," she shrieked, her voice carrying perfectly across the massive penthouse suite. "We beat you, Mom. We took everything from you. We forged those medical records. I paid Dr. Aris $200,000 to fake your dementia diagnosis. We planted those falsified tax documents on your personal server to frame you for federal tax evasion. We stole your passwords. We locked you in that server room to die. We own this hotel, and we are taking the money tonight." I sat perfectly still, absorbing her vicious confession. Every single word was sharp and loud. Every single admission of federal fraud, medical forgery, and attempted murder rang through the room with crystal clarity. I glanced casually toward the center of the massive dining table. Sitting between the lavish plates of imported Wagyu beef and the crystal decanters of wine was a massive, breathtaking floral centerpiece consisting of white lilies and orchids. Hidden deep inside the damp floral foam, perfectly concealed beneath the broad green leaves, was a high-definition wireless microphone. Isaiah had planted it there when he brought the catering carts up an hour ago. I was sitting in the staging kitchen right now, recording every single syllable onto an encrypted hard drive. I had not just destroyed their real estate deal. I had provoked my own daughter into delivering a full, unprompted voluntary confession to a massive multi-million-dollar federal conspiracy. The trap had closed perfectly. The jaws had snapped shut around her throat. "You really should learn to control your temper, Denise," I said quietly, my voice cutting through her hysterical screaming. "You talk entirely too much when you are angry." Denise stood there, chest heaving, panting like a wild dog. She glared at me, the absolute hatred radiating from her skin. "You are a dead woman, Mom. You have no money. You have no power. You are going to die with nothing." I did not respond to her insults. I slowly stood up from the mahogany chair, smoothing the crisp fabric of my white power suit. I looked at the lead syndicate boss who was watching this family meltdown with a mixture of disgust and dark amusement. I had given the federal authorities exactly what they needed. The confession was recorded. The criminal intent was established. Now I just needed to force the final devastating financial play. I needed the cartel to push the wire transfer button. The lead syndicate boss did not say a single word at first. He simply stared at Denise, who was still panting heavily from her hysterical, unhinged confession. The silence in the penthouse became thick and suffocating. The boss slowly turned his head to look at Terrence. Terrence was visibly trembling, his expensive tailored suit suddenly looking completely ridiculous on a man consumed by such profound cowardice. The disgust on the cartel leader's face was absolute and chilling. He did not see business partners sitting across from him. He saw an immense liability. The boss reached inside his dark jacket. The movement was incredibly smooth, entirely practiced, and devoid of any hesitation. He pulled out a sleek black handgun, equipped with a long cylindrical suppressor. He raised his arm with terrifying precision and pointed the barrel directly at the center of Terrence's forehead. Terrence threw his hands up in the air, letting out a high-pitched sound that barely resembled a human voice. He scrambled backward his chair, tipping over and crashing loudly against the polished marble floor. He fell onto his back, scrambling away like a terrified crab until he hit the floor-to-ceiling window. "I do not do business with amateurs," the boss said. His voice was a flat, terrifying monotone that carried absolutely no emotion. "I do not do business with emotional liabilities who scream their federal crimes into the open air for anyone to hear." Denise froze completely. The wild, furious energy that had fueled her screaming match just seconds ago evaporated instantly. It was replaced by pure, primal terror. She shrank back against the heavy mahogany table, her eyes darting between the suppressed pistol and her weeping husband. She finally realized the magnitude of the monster she had invited into my home. "You brought me a poisoned building," the boss continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward Terrence. "You lied to my face about the federal oversight. And now your wife is having a psychotic breakdown in front of me, openly admitting to forging medical documents and committing tax fraud. You two are a massive walking security risk. I am taking the signed deed. I am killing all three of you right here in this room. And I am burning this penthouse to the ground to cover my tracks. My men will carry your bodies down the freight elevator and dump them in the swamps before the sun even comes up." The other two syndicate enforcers immediately stepped forward, blocking the heavy wooden doors. They drew their own weapons, ensuring nobody was getting out of that dining room alive. "Please," Terrence sobbed, pressing his back against the glass window. "Please do not shoot. I can fix this. I can get you another property. I have other assets. Just take the hotel and let us go. I swear you will never see us again." The boss cocked his head to the side, looking down at Terrence with absolute contempt. "You have absolutely nothing left to offer me, Hayes. You are entirely worthless." He tightened his grip on the handgun, adjusting his stance to absorb the recoil of the execution. Denise let out a strangled whimper. She turned her head and looked directly at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with desperate, pleading tears. The arrogance was gone. The resentment was gone. She was just a terrified little girl, silently begging her mother to save her from the monster she had brought to our door. I looked at my treacherous daughter. She had plotted to chemicalize my brain. She had tried to steal 40 years of my blood, sweat, and tears. She had held a gun to my grandson's chest. Part of me wanted to stand back and let the cartel boss pull the trigger. Part of me wanted to watch Terrence pay the ultimate price for his arrogant greed. But I could not let them die in this penthouse tonight. I did not want to save them out of maternal love. I needed them alive because I needed them to face the federal authorities. I needed them to wear handcuffs, not body bags. And most importantly, I needed the syndicate boss to initiate the digital wire transfer so the FBI could spring the ultimate trap. I took one step forward, placing myself directly in the line of sight between the cartel boss and my weeping son-in-law. "If you kill us, that signed deed sitting on the table is completely worthless," I stated. My voice was sharp, commanding, and entirely devoid of fear. I stared directly down the barrel of his suppressed gun without blinking a single eye. The boss shifted his gaze to me, his scarred neck twitching slightly in annoyance. "Move out of the way, lady. You have already caused enough problems tonight." I did not move an inch. I stood tall, radiating the absolute authority of a chief executive officer negotiating a hostile takeover. "I am not causing problems. I am stating basic American property law," I told him, keeping my tone dangerously even. "If you put a bullet in his head, the medical examiner will declare it a homicide. The local police will seal this entire penthouse as an active crime scene. That physical deed, sitting on the mahogany table, will immediately become evidence in a capital murder investigation. You will never be able to file it with the county clerk's office. The property will remain legally in my name, and since I will also be dead, the entire Sapphire Hotel Group will go directly into a deeply complicated federal probate process." The boss frowned, his eyes narrowing as he processed the cold, hard logic of my words. "You run a sophisticated international import business." I continued, pushing my tactical advantage. "You need a clean, legitimate front to launder your cash. You need my loading docks and my corporate accounts. If you execute us tonight, you get absolutely nothing but a massive, sprawling murder investigation that will draw every single detective in Atlanta straight to your front door. You will lose your money, you will lose your freedom, and your entire operation will be dismantled." The room was agonizingly quiet. The only sound was Terrence gasping for air on the floor behind me. I could see the intense calculation happening behind the cartel leader's cold, dead eyes. He was a violent man, but he was also a businessman. He knew a bad investment when he saw one. He knew I was the only rational person standing in this room. "So what do you suggest I do?" the boss demanded, keeping the gun raised. "I am not leaving here empty-handed, and I am not leaving these two idiots alive to testify against me." I looked at the digital tablet resting on the table right next to the floral centerpiece hiding Isaiah's microphone. "I suggest you execute the $25 million wire transfer to his shell company right now," I said, my voice dropping to a ruthless pitch. "You opened the escrow portal before I walked into this room. The digital bridge is ready. Once you hit transfer and the money clears the Federal Registry, the property is yours legally and completely. The transaction will be authenticated. You will have your clean, legitimate front. And once the ink is digitally dry, you can do whatever you want with my worthless son-in-law." Terrence let out a loud, horrified gasp. "Vivian, no, you cannot let him do this." I did not even glance backward at him. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the syndicate boss. "I am offering you a clean transaction," I told him. "You wire the money, you secure the asset, and you walk away a legitimate real estate owner. If you shoot him first, the deal dies. It is simple economics." The boss stared at me for a long, heavy moment. A slow, dark smile crept across his scarred face. He was thoroughly impressed by my utter lack of sentimentality. He thought he was looking at a ruthless corporate predator who was perfectly willing to sell out her own family to protect the bottom line. He lowered the suppressed pistol, sliding it smoothly back into his tailored jacket. "You are a very cold woman," Ms. Vivian, the boss said, stepping back toward the mahogany table. "I respect that. You understand how the real world works. Your daughter and her husband are emotional children playing a game meant for adults." He reached out and picked up the digital tablet. The screen glowed, illuminating his harsh features. Denise clamped her hands over her mouth, suppressing a terrified sob. Terrence remained frozen on the floor, too paralyzed by fear to even attempt an escape. They both realized that I had just negotiated their execution in exchange for finalizing the real estate transfer. They thought I had completely abandoned them to the wolves. I stood perfectly still, watching the cartel boss tap his finger against the glowing screen. Every single muscle in my body was coiled tight with electric anticipation. We were at the absolute precipice. The entire federal operation, the entire revenge strategy, and the complete destruction of my enemies all rested on this singular digital action. "Do it!" I commanded, my voice echoing quietly through the luxurious penthouse suite. "Transfer the money." The syndicate boss looked down at the tablet, checking the routing numbers for Terrence's offshore shell company one final time. He let out a quiet breath of satisfaction and pressed his finger firmly against the glass screen, initiating the massive transaction. On my 68th birthday, my daughter leaned across our table at an upscale Atlanta steakhouse and whispered to her husband, "While I keep her busy, you go change the locks at her estate." He nodded, kissed my cheek, and slipped out the back door. I just sipped my sweet tea and smiled. 50 minutes later, he rushed back. He was sweating through his Italian suit. He grabbed my daughter's shoulder and whispered, "The house isn't empty. It is surrounded by armed private security. Your mother knows." Before I tell you how I dismantled my own daughter's life piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family who built the throne they sit on. I am Beatrice. I am 68 years old, and I am the founder and sole owner of Washington Logistics. I sat at the head of the mahogany table in that dimly lit restaurant, watching the color completely drain from my son-in-law Jackson's face. He was shaking so badly the ice in his water glass rattled against the crystal. My only daughter Camille stared at him in pure, unadulterated shock. "What do you mean she knows?" Camille hissed, pulling him down into the leather booth so the other wealthy patrons would not hear. "She is a confused old woman. She does not know anything." I set down my silver fork. I picked up the napkin and carefully dabbed the corners of my mouth. The smell of charred oak and expensive Wagyu beef filled the air, but my appetite was completely gone. I looked dead at the two people I had given my entire life to. Did you really think a woman who built a freight empire with 518 wheelers from a broken delivery van in 1988 would not know when her own daughter clones her master keys? I let the words hang in the air. The smooth jazz music playing over the speakers suddenly felt incredibly loud. The silence that fell over our private table was absolute. Camille froze. Her perfect, loving daughter's smile melted away, revealing the greedy, desperate stranger she had truly become. "You really thought you could slip into my home and lock me out of my own life?" I asked, leaning forward. My voice was calm, but it carried the heavy weight of 40 years of hard-fought business battles. I have survived cutthroat real estate developers, racist transport brokers who refused to sign contracts with a black woman, and 3 global economic crashes. I noticed your hardware store detour the second you put my spare keys back on the wrong hook last Sunday. You always were sloppy, Camille. Camille did not apologize. She did not cry or beg for forgiveness. She just straightened her posture and dropped the dutiful act completely. Her eyes turned ice cold. She raised her hand and snapped her fingers toward the front entrance of the restaurant. The heavy oak doors of our private dining room swung open. 2 large men wearing gray medical scrubs walked in carrying a heavy canvas medical bag. Camille reached into her designer purse and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table right over my birthday card. "Read it and weep." "Mom," she said, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth or guilt. "The judge signed the psychiatric hold this morning. Dr. Marcus Aris officially diagnosed you with stage 2 dementia. You are legally incompetent. Those orderlies are taking you to a locked memory care ward right now. Jackson and I have full legal conservatorship of Washington Logistics. Your reign is over." I looked down at the papers, the forged signatures, the fake medical history. My own flesh and blood was trying to chemically lobotomize me and bury me in a psychiatric ward just to get their hands on my freight company. Jackson finally found his nerve stepping out from behind his wife. "It is for your own good, Beatrice," he said, trying to sound authoritative, trying to sound like the boss he desperately wanted to be. "You are losing your grip on reality. You cannot manage 500 container trucks and international shipping lanes anymore. We are stepping in to protect the family legacy before you run it into the ground." "Protect the legacy." I laughed, and the sound was so sharp it made Jackson flinch. I did not panic. I did not scream for help. I used our family history as a lethal weapon. "You are using Dr. Marcus Aris?" I asked, tapping the forged medical document with my manicured fingernail. "The same Marcus Aris whose underground plastic surgery clinic I bailed out of a massive malpractice lawsuit 10 years ago. Have you forgotten, Jackson? I paid $3 million in hush money out of my own pocket to keep that butcher out of federal prison because he was your college roommate, and you begged me to save your fragile ego. You think a psychiatric hold signed by a man I secretly own will stand up in a federal court for even 5 minutes? I have the receipts, Jackson. I always keep the receipts." Camille slammed her hands on the table, rattling the silverware. "It is a legally binding court order, Mom. The local police will drag you out of here in a straitjacket if you resist. You are going to a facility tonight, and we are taking over the board of directors tomorrow morning." I stared at the diamond necklace resting on her collarbone, the exact same necklace I bought her when she graduated from Spelman College. "You are trying to steal my life," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the tension. "Why? I gave you a massive trust fund. I bought you a sprawling mansion in Buckhead. I gave Jackson a corner office at my company with a salary he never actually earned. Why are you trying to destroy your own mother?" Jackson smirked, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Because a trust fund is just an allowance, Beatrice. We want the principal. We want the real money. And as for your federal court threat, it does not matter. The forged medical papers do not have to hold up forever. They only need to hold up for 48 hours, long enough for me to bypass the board of directors and liquidate the entire commercial fleet." I felt a sudden cold realization wash over me. Liquidate the commercial fleet. Those 500 trucks were worth tens of millions of dollars. He was not just trying to take over the business and run it. He was trying to burn it down for fast cash. "Do you even know the history of the company you are trying to liquidate, Jackson?" I asked, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. That company was built on the exact city block where my grandfather was denied a commercial bank loan simply because of the color of his skin. I bought that land to prove a point. I built a monument to our excellence in a city that tried to keep us out of the boardrooms. You want to sell our legacy to the highest bidder to cover your own incompetence. You are not a businessman. You are a parasite feeding off the blood of my hard work. Jackson's face flushed a deep, angry red. I am the one with the business degree, Beatrice. I am the one who understands modern logistics and corporate restructuring. Your outdated emotional attachment to a bunch of dirty diesel trucks is exactly why you need to be placed in a conservatorship. You let sentimentality blind your financial judgment. The market does not care about your grandfather. The market cares about liquidity and profit margins. The market cares about survival, I fired back. Something you know absolutely nothing about because I shielded you from it. You sell that fleet and you put 800 hardworking people out on the street, I continued. People who have worked for me since before you were born. Families who depend on those paychecks to survive. Jackson shrugged, showing absolutely zero remorse. That sounds like a them problem. He nodded to the men in the gray scrubs. They stepped closer, blocking the only exit from our private booth. One of them reached into the canvas bag and pulled out a heavy sedative syringe. The sharp needle gleamed under the expensive restaurant chandeliers. I looked around the room, analyzing my escape routes. The waiter who had been serving us was conveniently gone. The restaurant manager was standing by the main bar, staring intently at the floor, completely ignoring what was happening in our section. Jackson had bought them off. He had paid them to look the other way, while his hired thugs dragged a screaming elderly woman out the back door under the guise of a tragic medical emergency. "Come quietly, Mom," Camille said, stepping back to let the large men approach me. "The medication will make you feel nice and relaxed. You will not even know what you are signing when you wake up tomorrow in your new padded room." I stood up, pushing my chair back. I was 68 years old, but I stood tall, refusing to cower. "You think I am going to let you erase me, Camille?" I asked. "I built this empire with my bare hands. When your father died, I worked 20-hour days to make sure you never knew what poverty tasted like. I fought zoning boards, city councils, and corrupt bankers to secure our future. I did not survive all of that just to be taken down by a spoiled child and a weak man." Jackson laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "Your history lesson is very touching, Beatrice, but it is over. Grab her arms," he ordered the orderlies. The two large men lunged forward. One reached for my shoulder, his massive hand clamping down on my tailored blazer. The other uncapped the syringe, preparing to plunge it into my arm. I braced myself, refusing to show them an ounce of fear. I stared directly into Camille's eyes, wanting her to see the exact moment she lost her mother forever. She did not look away. She just watched, waiting for the drugs to take me down. Suddenly, I shoved my heavy chair backward with all my might. It crashed into the legs of the first orderly. He stumbled, slipping on the polished marble floor. I did not wait for the second man to react. I grabbed the heavy crystal water pitcher from the center of the table and hurled the icy water directly into the face of the man holding the syringe. He yelled in shock, wiping his eyes. I bolted. I pushed past Jackson, my shoulder slamming hard into his chest, knocking him against the booth. I sprinted out of the private dining room and into the main restaurant. "Stop her," Camille screamed from behind me. "She is a danger to herself." I ignored the stares of the wealthy diners. I pushed through the heavy glass front doors of the steakhouse and burst out into the warm Atlanta evening. My chest was heaving. I ran toward the valet stand, reaching into my purse for my keys. I handed my ticket to the young valet, panting. "My car, the black Mercedes. Bring it now." The valet looked at me, confusion crossing his face. "Ma'am, a gentleman came out here 20 minutes ago. He said you were intoxicated and gave us authorization to have the vehicle towed to your home for your safety. Your car is gone." I froze. Jackson had towed my car. He had stranded me. I quickly pulled my platinum credit card from my wallet to hail a private car service, but my phone screen flashed with a notification. My accounts were locked, all of them. They had already triggered the conservatorship with the bank. I was standing in the middle of Buckhead, a multimillionaire with absolutely no money, no car, and hired thugs rushing out the restaurant doors behind me. "There she is!" Jackson yelled, bursting onto the sidewalk with the two orderlies right on his heels. I backed away, panic finally starting to claw at my throat. I had nowhere to run. The orderlies closed the distance, their heavy boots pounding against the pavement. Suddenly, the screech of worn-out tires shattered the tense air. A beat-up silver Honda Civic swerved violently into the valet lane, jumping the curb and blocking the orderly's path. The passenger door flew open with a loud metallic groan. "Get in right now, Grandma," a voice shouted from the driver's seat. I peered into the dark car. It was my 21-year-old grandson, Malik, Camille's own son. He was a cybersecurity student at Morehouse College, a brilliant kid who usually kept entirely to himself. Right now his eyes were wide with sheer terror, and his hands were gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. "Malik," I gasped. "They are calling the police to drag you to the asylum!" Malik yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Get in the car before they grab you!" I did not hesitate. I threw myself into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut just as the first orderly reached the vehicle. He pounded his fist against the glass, but Malik slammed his foot on the gas pedal. The Honda lurched forward, leaving Jackson and Camille standing furiously in the rearview mirror. I leaned back against the cheap fabric seat, trying to catch my breath as we sped away into the Atlanta night. The first battle was over, but the war for my empire had just begun. The glowing screen of the digital tablet reflected in the dark, scarred eyes of the Miami syndicate boss. He had pressed his finger against the glass with absolute certainty, expecting the satisfying confirmation of a $25 million transaction. He expected to see the routing numbers of Terrence's offshore shell company validating his new pristine money laundering hub. Instead, the screen froze for a fraction of a second. A small loading circle spun rapidly, and then the interface violently shifted. The standard banking green vanished. It was instantly replaced by a stark, blinding white background featuring a massive, highly detailed golden eagle grasping a cluster of arrows. The official seal of the United States Department of Justice. The boss did not speak. His breathing stopped entirely. He stared at the glowing tablet as if it had suddenly turned into a live explosive device in his hand. The bold black text beneath the seal read, "Transfer complete, asset forfeiture account secure." "What is this?" the boss whispered, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogant power. The tablet slipped from his fingers, hitting the mahogany table with a sharp clatter. "What did you just do?" I remained perfectly still in my chair, absorbing the pure, unadulterated shock radiating across the table. I smoothed the immaculate white fabric of my blazer. "Did you really think I built a $60 million real estate empire in America without knowing every single detail of commercial property law?" I asked, my voice echoing with lethal precision. "The Sapphire Hotel is not just a standard commercial building, Terrence. It is formally registered as a federal historic landmark of the civil rights movement." Terrence let out a pathetic whimpering sound from the floor, his eyes darting frantically between me and the frozen syndicate leader. "What does that mean?" he choked out. "It means you are a complete amateur," I replied, turning my gaze back to the cartel boss. "By United States law, transferring a historic trust deed to a foreign-backed shell corporation without a mandatory 60-day congressional review is an automatic, heavily prosecuted federal felony." When you hit transfer, I continued leaning slightly forward as the syndicate boss stared at the Department of Justice seal. In absolute, unmitigated horror, Isaiah did not block the money. He did not lock you out of the portal. He simply routed your $25 million directly into an active Federal Bureau of Investigation asset forfeiture account. The color drained entirely from the syndicate boss's scarred face. His thick hands began to tremble. "You did not just buy a hotel tonight," I stated, delivering the final devastating blow. "You just voluntarily funded your own multi-million-dollar federal indictment. You wired cartel money directly to the United States government while sitting in a room filled with hidden microphones." The sheer magnitude of the trap finally crashed down on the syndicate leader. The absolute realization that he had been completely outmaneuvered by a 68-year-old woman shattered his composed exterior. A raw, guttural roar of pure animalistic rage tore from his throat. He lunged across the mahogany table, kicking the forged environmental documents and the digital tablet out of his way. He reached violently into his tailored jacket, pulling out the suppressed black pistol he had holstered just moments ago. He did not aim at Terrence this time. He pointed the barrel squarely at the center of my forehead, his eyes burning with a dark, murderous intent. "I will kill you myself," he screamed, his finger tightening dangerously on the trigger. He never got the chance to fire. Before the firing pin could even click, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite completely exploded inward. It was not a simple break. It was a simultaneous, synchronized kinetic breach. A deafening concussive shockwave ripped through the luxurious dining room as explosive breaching charges shattered the reinforced glass into millions of tiny, sparkling fragments. The violent implosion sucked the air right out of the room. Instantly, 4 blindingly bright flashbang grenades deployed, bouncing across the polished marble floor and detonating with a series of blinding white flashes and ear-splitting bangs. The noise was absolute physical agony. My vision flared pure white, but I threw my arms over my head and dropped safely behind the thick, heavy oak frame of my dining chair. The pristine penthouse transformed instantly into a chaotic, violent war zone. Through the ringing in my ears and the thick white smoke pouring from the detonated grenades, I saw dark, heavily armored figures swinging through the shattered window frames on tactical rappelling ropes. The FBI Special Weapons and Tactics team had been waiting silently on the roof exactly as Marshal Hayes had promised. Simultaneously, the heavy wooden doors leading to the staging kitchen and the executive elevators were kicked entirely off their hinges. Dozens of federal agents flooded into the room wearing heavy black tactical gear and carrying assault rifles equipped with blinding tactical flashlights. The laser sights cut through the thick smoke like a grid of solid red lasers, locking onto every single target in the room. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," a commanding voice roared through a megaphone. "Get on the ground right now. Do not move." The syndicate enforcers who had been guarding the doors tried to raise their rifles, but they were violently tackled to the marble floor by overwhelming force before they could even disengage their safeties. Heavy combat boots slammed into their backs, pinning them down as steel handcuffs zipped securely around their wrists. The lead syndicate boss dropped his suppressed pistol immediately, realizing that any resistance would result in his instant death. He raised his hands high in the air, coughing through the thick smoke, as 3 federal agents swarmed him, driving his face harshly against the polished mahogany table he had planned to conquer. Terrence was sobbing uncontrollably. He had curled himself into a pathetic fetal position against the shattered window frame, his custom suit covered in glass shards and dust. "Please do not shoot," he cried hysterically, keeping his hands clamped firmly over the back of his head. "I surrender. I did not do anything. She forced me." 2 agents hauled Terrence roughly to his feet, twisting his arms behind his back and snapping the cold metal cuffs onto his wrists. He continued to weep like a broken coward, completely stripped of the arrogant corporate persona he had worn all night. The smoke began to slowly clear, drawn out through the shattered windows into the humid Atlanta night air. The blaring sound of police sirens echoed loudly from the city streets 40 stories below, signaling the massive federal perimeter that had completely locked down the entire block. The tactical operation was flawlessly executed. Not a single shot had been fired by the cartel. The raid was a total, absolute victory. I slowly stood up from behind my chair. I brushed a few stray pieces of shattered glass off the pristine sleeves of my white suit. My heart was still hammering a rapid, relentless rhythm, but my mind was incredibly sharp. I watched the federal agents systematically secure the penthouse, shouting clear as they moved from room to room. An agent with golden commanding bars on his tactical vest approached me, lowering his weapon. "Ms. Vivian," he asked respectfully. I nodded, straightening my posture. "I am completely unharmed," I assured him. Across the room, a loud, desperate struggle was taking place. 2 federal agents were dragging Denise out from under the heavy dining table. My daughter looked absolutely unrecognizable. Her expensive designer dress was torn and covered in white dust. Her perfectly styled hair was a tangled, chaotic mess. The heavy mascara she wore had run down her cheeks in thick, dark tracks, mixing with her terrified tears. She fought wildly against the agents gripping her arms, her high heels slipping frantically on the slick marble floor. "No," she screamed, her voice raw and hoarse. "You cannot arrest me. I am a victim here. My husband forced me into this. I did not want to steal the company." The agents ignored her pathetic protests, forcefully twisting her wrists behind her back to apply the handcuffs. As they marched her roughly toward the exit, her wild, desperate eyes locked onto me, standing calmly amidst the wreckage of my penthouse. She dug her heels into the floor, forcing the agents to momentarily halt their march just a few feet away from me. She fell heavily to her knees, the sharp, broken glass crunching audibly beneath her bare skin. She looked up at me, her face a mask of absolute pure begging desperation. "Mom," she sobbed, her voice cracking violently. "Mom, please do something. Tell them I was manipulated. Tell them I did not know what Terrence was planning with the cartel. I am your daughter. I am your own flesh and blood. You cannot let them take me to prison. Please, Mom. I am your blood." I looked down at the woman kneeling in the glass. I looked at the daughter I had sacrificed my entire youth to protect. I looked at the person who had willingly ground veterinary tranquilizers into my evening tea and smiled while she locked me inside a suffocating metal box to die. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity. No regret. Just the cold, clean emptiness of a tumor being successfully excised from my body. I slowly raised my hands and calmly adjusted the immaculate white cuffs of my tailored blazer. I met her tear-streaked, desperate gaze with eyes made of solid, unyielding stone. "Blood is just genetics, Denise," I stated, my voice carrying perfectly through the quieted room. "Loyalty is a choice. You chose to align yourself with a criminal cartel. You chose to value luxury cars and country club memberships over the life of your own mother and the safety of your own son. You dug this grave with your own two greedy hands." She let out a loud, agonizing wail, dropping her head toward the floor. Now I added, stepping back to let the federal agents continue their work. "Let us see if they offer premium room service in federal prison." The agents hoisted her back to her feet, ignoring her hysterical sobbing. They marched her and her weeping husband out of the shattered penthouse, their criminal ambitions completely and permanently extinguished. I stood alone in the center of my command suite, breathing in the cool night air rushing through the broken windows. The trap had closed. The empire was secure. 1 full year later, the humid summer breeze swept across the sprawling balcony of the Sapphire Hotel penthouse. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows had been entirely replaced, the mahogany table restored to its immaculate shine. The deep scars of that violent night had been completely erased from the building, leaving behind only the gleaming, polished monument to my relentless hard work. The federal justice system had moved with ruthless, incredible efficiency. The audio recordings Isaiah captured from the floral centerpiece, combined with the perfectly executed $25 million wire transfer, provided an ironclad, insurmountable case. Terrence and Denise both plead guilty to avoid a drawn-out public trial. They were currently serving 20-year sentences in a maximum security federal penitentiary, completely stripped of the possibility of early parole. The Miami syndicate was violently dismantled by the U.S. attorney, their assets seized, and their operations permanently destroyed. I stood near the edge of the balcony, resting my hands on the cool glass railing. The vibrant, glittering skyline of Atlanta stretched out endlessly before me, a sea of golden lights and towering ambition. I listened to the steady, quiet footsteps approaching from the interior of the suite. I turned around to see Isaiah stepping out onto the terrace. He was no longer the terrified college student gripping a steering wheel in a stolen catering van. I was 21 years old, wearing a sharp, perfectly tailored charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. He walked with the calm, assured confidence of a man who had faced down an armed cartel and won. "The board unanimously approved the expansion project in Charlotte," he announced, handing me a sleek leather portfolio. "And the new biometric security protocols for the internal servers are fully operational. No one is getting into our network ever again." I took the portfolio, but I did not open it. I looked at my brilliant, loyal grandson, the true heir to everything I had built. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the heavy brass master keys to the building, along with a solid gold fountain pen. I held them out to him, resting them gently in the palm of his hand. "I built this massive empire entirely for survival," I told him, my voice filled with a deep, resounding pride. "I built it so we would never have to bow our heads to anyone. Now it is yours to rule, Isaiah. You are the vice president of the Sapphire Group. Do not ever let anyone tell you that you are too young to lead this family or that I am too old to fight for it." Isaiah looked down at the keys, a fierce, determined smile spreading across his face. He nodded, gripping the gold pen tightly. "I will protect it, Grandma. I promise." He stepped back into the office to prepare for our next meeting, leaving me alone on the balcony. I turned my gaze toward the camera, a sly, victorious smile playing on my lips. They truly thought a 68-year-old black woman would just nod, quietly drink her poisoned tea, and fade away into a locked nursing home while they stole her heavy crown. They thought they could erase my legacy with a forged signature and a cheap suit. But they forgot one very simple fundamental truth. Queens do not retire. They reign. Tell me honestly, would you have let your own daughter rot in a tiny federal cell for 20 years? Or would you have shown her mercy after she tried to bury you alive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.